Yes, sir. Have some fun and get it done.
Here we go. Hey, welcome everyone to another edition of the interview series. My name is Matthew Lever. I am the mind behind this. Today I'm with Mr. Brian Strout. Brian,
Hi.
welcome to your own home.
Thanks. Welcome to my house. It's still, you can see my partially completed Blue Lagoon I'm building here.
And we have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Artie, all the way from Portugal.
Yeah.
I mean, we could go in a lot of different directions, no doubt. We had a really interesting first conversation, and you really get to the hot takes. I think that's a lot of where you're coming from.
I think they're hot takes for y'all. They're not hot takes for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially with the, you're coming from an interesting angle into the art world.
Yeah.
Especially coming from like a marketing background and of course a Bostonian in Austin.
Yeah.
There's so many different directions that are extremely relevant, and obviously how do we make art meaningful, and also how do we blend that meaning into what is void of meaning in capitalism.
Sure.
And just like the big conundrum of our times.
I think we're gonna find some more debate on not how we do it, but why we even would. Kind of where I think we'll deviate a little bit in some capacity. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you want to take it from there regarding because again, it's worth exploring in thought.
Sure. So I think, how do I even dive into it? When you think about like art as like a total like overlapping history of things, and you think of like the more recognized art movements, it's kind of hard to try and figure out like if there is any relevant movement happening now in any sort of capacity. And I also kind of would wonder, and there's no answer to this, like what happens in between, like what happened directly before and directly after Expressionism and stuff like that. I think that after like the neo-expressionism movement in the 80s, with people like Basquiat, and I'm not good with fucking art history, but he's the big name that I know. Out of there also came, a lot of pop art, and I don't really know. I was too young to really understand like art movements in the '90s, if there were anything like that. But I do feel right now, especially with things like Instagram and YouTube, there's a lot of pressure to make stuff that is considered popular, and especially where art is, for a lot of people, not something you can do for free. Things and spaces cost money. There is also like the pressure to make money, which it's not to say that people that are successful in making money aren't doing what they would be doing if they didn't have to, but it is just to kind of say like there is that element of capitalistic need in artwork. I think, the only country that I know of right now is Ireland, who's just giving artists like a national stipend if they apply and get approved. And I think that artists, irrelevant of the medium or irrelevant of like their approach to the definition of what art is, cannot make like something new or interesting or like push the boundaries of what we consider art or its purpose if we have like bills hanging over our head in some capacity. There's obviously ways around that some people will find, but then you also have to kind of factor in that there's definitely an element, an influence of like mainstream graphic design impacting what is considered successful art nowadays. And by successful, I mean people buy. You can hunk around Instagram for like a short period of time and see like people selling very expensive pieces of art. I saw a lady today who I've never heard of before, and I just didn't really like what she was doing. She was taking these kind of like goofy outlines of like an amorphous shape that felt very like lava lampy, hot topicy, and then like painting the negative space over like an extremely nice piece of wood, and then you see it like hung up in some rich person's house, and it's like, Jesus Christ, that is, you know, it's far away from the type of art that I've always grabbed. So,
Well, you opened up the space pretty nicely.
thank you.
A lot of, it sounds so like even in that example that you just closed with that woman that made just like, basically some element of pop art.
Sure.
Was she like a very like affluent and
I would assume so, yes.
right?
Yeah.
So like it's even this strange, dog chasing its own tail type of thing around like algorithms and the programming within the minds of people that have wealth in the idea of what is art because of how much that is ingrained through repetition around what is acceptable patterns of expression. And so like in that way of like if a person's because of their limited exposure to the humanity and just human relationships, and they're living through screens, and they're finding relevancy of connection by means of what people are wanting to present themselves as in that sort of way. That then like art is essentially esteemed by what is meritorious within the algorithm versus like what is the potential direction of a creative experience of our time. I know that's a lot of words.
Yeah.
But you hear what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it also it does. I think a lot of like this conversation, in my opinion, comes down to like catering your expectations of the success and impact of art on people and or culture. I think there's big moments where like big gestures that are artistic will impact a movement in some capacity, but that's like one in a billion. And so the majority of people that make art, probably including myself, will never have some sort of an impact on the, populace, even in small circles. And most artists historically have never like been alive and enjoyed their successes. Honestly, till recently, in recent history, maybe like the 60s, 70s, 80s, everyone that we ever kind of knew like wasn't, Van Gogh, for example, wasn't like the cool guy in his town that everyone fucking wanted to hang out with. He was a weird recluse with like incestuous habits. But his work was great. At least according to history, his work was great. I think the thing about all of that that's relevant is that art has always had a direct connection with the upper class. It has always been related to upper class in some capacity, and I think there's like some sort of social signal to that sort of stuff. If you look at anyone that has ever been a street artist or anything like that, not to show how little I know of varying people, but like going back to Basquiat, like he was a street artist who then got propelled into the high art world. High art world, in that definition, was a bunch of rich people. They didn't come to him in his, his nature and find more artists. It's there's been some cool stuff. I think it's the show Adam Ruins Everything did a nice episode on like how art is curated and gatekept and all sorts of stuff. And even right now, like the big thing, from my understanding, is what Basel in Miami is like the big art show,
Right.
And like to get your piece into that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've heard. I didn't look. It's not really
Right.
Even if it's $40, it's out of my budget. But it is very much a means of capital, not of quality. Although quality does typically go along with capital, but it's not the measuring device there.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up some interesting points about the politicization of art, and just even looking at art history over even just let's say over the past 100 years, and like how much things have become mechanized
Sure.
And like even how, as they say, like Victor writes the history books regarding like what is the indigenous role of an artist within a collective group of individuals, and
Sure.
like like where are the ties? And this was like um part of the discussion I was having with a previous interview regarding like how can we maybe find a semblance between the role of artists, and I'm not trying to go in that direction, but just as a thought experiment right now, just like the role of an artist in a cultural setting, and how that maybe is tied to the role of a priest also in a cultural setting, and like how each culture is defining its own priest role without it being defined to any like religion, um and like different ways of like, again, how do we connect to inspiration and its relevancy of its expression to maybe um enable patterns of behavior and see them as acceptable, and like how that, again, that sort of goes into like the elite, the self-entitled elite classes choosing who are the privileged chosen in the art world to exemplify these traits.
I see. I'd buck against some of the
Go
things
for
you're
it.
alluding to there. Where it's like I don't think that people that are upper class are automatically elitists or self-chosen or even aware of like the mechanics of these sort of things. The town that I grew up in most of my life has a lot of wealthy people, and I mean like wealthy people. I know someone who owns a castle next to the ocean. But these are people that like maybe it's just New England culture. Like they will talk to you like you're a person, and they will treat you with dignity and respect. Um, so I don't know if it's necessarily always going to be a scenario where it's very easy to demonize people for being more financially successful or more financially gifted than you are coming up in your life. But also, it's also very easy to forget like if you were like your morality around a lot of those things probably comes from um, not having that cushion at your accessibility. So you're like maybe a little bit more aware, and it's interesting to see when somebody has that awareness. I think of like, for lack of a less cliche phrase, like their privilege. Um, I think it's more so like when you interact with high fashion or high art or anything like that, you will find people that are, maybe I'm assuming a little bit here, but like I think you will find more people that are gatekeeping that aren't the actual creators. They're the people that make money off of curation and things of that nature, which makes sense. If that's your job, that's your job. And that's kind of, I think, like the overarching point that I'll constantly fall back to when it comes to discussions on art. You can point out all of these things that are less desirable about art if you want art to be um, something more than just something aesthetically pleasing and have more significance. But we do live in a capitalistic society. People do gravitate towards things that they just connect with either aesthetically or culturally. And that does not always mean that they're going to then read the story of the artist or like understand a piece of the work. I think my favorite like little experiment that I do when I go to an art opening is artists will always write mission statements about the exhibition, and there's your little bio. And I like paying attention to how many people in the room have actually picked that up and read it. And I usually, unless I immediately hate what I'm looking at, will try to stop and read what this person took time to write. It will also make me immediately understand if I connect with the general concept they're trying to work with, or if it's like too woo woo for me. I really, growing up working class in New England, or at least partially working class, um, I really don't vibe well with like what I consider to be like forced spiritualism on stuff. I think that's trying to like almost monetize something that should be moved in the exact opposite direction. But these are like, you know, the types of things you run into. So it's kind of nice to know, like, hey, if I'm looking at your artwork, like, what is your perspective? Artwork, I can read into like the subtext of like where this person's coming from as a person. Sometimes even class-wise, you can tell just how they talk about things in their journey. Like, all right, well, it's hard to relate to you if I feel like you're coming from a place where I'm aspiring to be, and you're bummed out about it, or think that there's more to go. But that's all that.
Mm-hmm.
Not to ramble too much, but like all that kind of plays into the same thing of like what art means in our society is always going to be up to the individual and how they perceive it, or if it's like a status signal, or if it's like a poetic gesture, or if it's a way to touch on things that are important to them in a visual way. And I don't think that it makes sense to try and put any of it into a hierarchy as in like, oh, well, this is more valuable because I put emotion into it, and this is less valuable because it's just aesthetically pleasing. I think it just makes sense to understand that this is like the wide spectrum of different interpretations of what art is, and some art will play to that, and some art will ignore it, and success is,
Yeah.
kind of shot in the dark, I guess. I don't know. I have to ask someone who's successful about with artwork to get on that one.
Yeah, because I think it's anyone can go into a museum, so to say, and see like a very colossal moving piece that really exemplifies a lot of the themes that are extremely relevant for the times, with all of the blood and the guts of humanity. But is that something that someone really wants to have in their home endlessly? And like that again, like
Sure.
more of that, like the aesthetic and more of the interior quality, the interior design qualities, where it's more like that's always a part of life, and that is a continual thing to be mindful of. But at the same time, like if that is an endless, if that is the endless point that is always circulating, then it can be hard to get out of that gravity and that out of that density and be more in like, okay, how do we find genuine harmony and that quality of peace where it's lighter and it gives more space and more allowance for interactions and spontaneity without like immediately injecting like, hey, we like vote with the government. You know what I mean? It's like, well, all of these things are extremely relevant. Obviously, this is like the biggest point, but like, how can we? Okay, like that's definitely happening, and like, where do we, um, like, how do we move forward with maybe like new creative designs, in spite of all of these things? And of course, like that's where like access to resources and like responsibility comes in with like being an artist. I don't know, hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think it kind of comes down to, in some capacity, there are people that already are. Um, I'm really bad with remembering names, so I just like save them on my phone or call them on Instagram. But there are some phenomenal artists that are doing some wonderful things out there in the great abyss. But I think one thing that I would point out is that, like, going back to you said earlier about having art act as like the cultural equivalent of like a priest or a guiding light. Um, there with art and artists and creative endeavors in general, especially with like the rise of digital art and now AI, there's such an overabundance of things out there. Whereas, when you think of leaning on the analogy of a priest, you go to a small town, there's one priest, maybe two, and they rotate. But like, if you're looking for art to be the leader in any capacity, I don't think that that's possible. The last thing that I saw where art actually took the general population and like grabbed their attention for a moment, some good attention, some bad attention, and I'm using the word art extremely loose here, would be NFT art. I have a friend who I've teased him a lot about it. He was very into it, and he's made money off of it. but it's strange to me that that would be considered art, and that's also, I think, kind of one of the hard things to really like get around is that the term art is such an umbrella vocabulary term at this point in time. And it's a noun. It's also kind of an adjective. It's like an abstract noun. It's like, oh, the art of this, blah blah. So when you're talking about things, even inside your own head, like as I use the word art, it could mean a variation of things, and you can also be interpreting it in different ways. So it, I think it, for starters, understanding that that's a problem with communicating and getting on the same page about this, but also I think the bigger thing is that like NFT art is great because it was driven by money. It's such a great example of I think everything that I'm getting at. In people absolutely hated on it, and then there's also a fucking banana that sold taped to a wall, and that was sold for more money than I make in a year. I don't remember how much, but I know it's more than I make in a year. And it's just a banana, and it's whatever you want to call the artistic expression behind it. In and of itself, it's like an absurdist commentary on wealth and art and the value of things. Meanwhile, that money that went towards this rotting, now gone banana could have solved like problems for real people. So there's this kind of I have this type of dialogue inside of me, um, and that's why it gets kind of dicey for me to try and take it outside of a capitalism point of view.
There's so many different, again, there's so many directions that it can go from. But it kind of pulls me back to that conversation we even had when we just met out front when you were inviting me in. Just the frustration as just an example of like getting into the dating world.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And just like the frustration around recognizing that, from where, like you sharing a little bit about your journey and like where you've come from and your mother and your father dynamic, and that you've had because of the depth of your own personal experience and like seeing those qualities of humanity that are otherwise like they're the outcasts and that they're the untouchables, but you've through your own journey and through whatever is the mystical equation that is your own fate, that you've journeyed to like a place where like again you have your own space and you're finding relevancy in your own life in your own ways, but like you in the exploration in your own ways of like that equation of like what is love, what is connection, what is meaning in an intimate way with other people, that you're finding that even still that there seems to be maybe a connection with another woman as an example, that there's just a lack of that exposure, lack of that experience that would give more of a foundation for things to move forward.
Well, I think the general statement that the only statement I can think of that makes sense for me to talk about my social life and my endeavors in creative stuff. I think it comes down to a lot of things revolve around whether or not you develop the skill of acceptance. I don't think you need to be at peace with things. I'm not at peace with a lot of things, but I've accepted a lot of things. And that lack of peace is what drives me to try again. If I don't like how a piece of mine is or is received, that allows me to prioritize, hey, what is important for me out of this piece? Is this piece something that I'm trying to communicate something, or is this something that I really want the general people here to like? And that's kind of in my own approach to stuff. There are things that I make that are coming from a personal place, and there are things that I make that I'm like, I think this was just something that like I like the aesthetic, and maybe someone else would appreciate it. It matches the aesthetic of the pieces that I make. but like that is my self-portrait, which I don't think anyone wants to have in their house. You never know. People are weird.
Is that clay?
No, there's some clay in it, but it's mostly resin and wood and wax.
Mm.
Um, but I think that kind of comes down to maybe it's character, or how you're raised. But if you don't have that character or you're not raised that way, like I think you learn it in time of like understanding, delusions of grandeur, whether that be socially, or like in any sort of creative endeavor, is always like going to be the worst enemy you can have to like enjoy the process. And I think a lot of people talk about the process of making art and how it's good for them or therapeutic. I think art therapy is wonderful, and a great thing to explore. I don't like pieces of art that solely rely upon the process. I want the piece to be done, which means do some drafts, try again, swing again. But if you're doing artistic endeavors, as a way to stroke your own brain or like work through something, I think that's super healthy. And I think it would benefit a lot of people to just doodle more. But I think trying to do something and leaning on it to succeed, like in some sort of popularity or capital driven sense, like is going to make you miserable. I lean on that really heavily because I'm also a musician and I've played in very unpopular bands a lot. And by that I mean like we never went anywhere or did anything. Like people liked us and we played and we had friends or stuff like that. And like I enjoyed the process of writing music with friends of mine. But watching people try and do something along the lines of quote unquote make it famous is almost kind of like they're missing. I don't know. They're missing the point, I guess, in some capacity of what I think making creative endeavor should be. Not to say that you can't like shoot for the stars, but I feel like that's the only thing important to you on the journey. I just think you're gonna end up sad. You should be a sad person.
Because how much desperation is fueling that endeavor,
Sure.
expression, and just like again the starvation for validation.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's potentially that, or I think when you look at something as means to an end as opposed to um, something else more wholesome to your spirit, is it's going to make it hard not to be sad when you don't hit that mark. Right? If you don't have a mark, if you have no like measurement of success that you're holding it towards hitting, then it's fine if it doesn't get there, and it's a pleasant surprise if it does. But that also comes back to the whole conversation of like a lot of people who make art like need for it to make money so they can pay for their $600 a month studio plus supplies. um I at times, and like even right now, like I'm taking a short break from art, and by short break I mean like a week or two, because I need more stuff to do what I want to do, and I've given myself a budget because I have like other things I want to do. So I'm going to focus on some digital work products I've got going on, and like kind of have everything lined up ready to go. But like that's because I don't have like endless funds to just make shit all day.
A lot of the things that we just touched on are easy to communicate after, because it's like, that awareness that you just spoke of is an easy talking point without not having you. That's in essence something that you've learned through direct experience and the trial by fire and the recognition of like what it really drives you forward, and having to learn in your own ways how maybe your own aims were misaligned with a deeper purpose.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from my upbringing. I have a very nice and caring family that would help me out if I ever needed help, but will not give me things. Like it's we. I grew up in a very you earn this. You earn your way, and it's not to say that I've never received anything from them, but like the expectation was never set that like, oh, if I want to do this, my parents will pay for it. Like just I never had that. And that's to do with like their upbringing and I think like old New England culture. And also that like we don't like my family has generally done okay from the mid '90s on, but no one came from wealth, and they just were in the right industry in the '90s, and so we had like I could go skiing, and I think for like a lot of people, skiing is like, oh yeah, we do that. Oh no, that's I know a lot of people growing up like on my mom's side of the family up in New Hampshire that like couldn't afford to go. So I think like just having that dialogue in the back of my brain nonstop, even as I navigate like wealthier spaces, it makes it kind of hard to ignore um, that this is something that like plays into it, and you can tell when somebody has a financial backer, whether that be a partner or family member, that has put no constraints on how much time or money they can spend on this endeavor. And I also kind of feel like that a lot of stuff that comes out of that area is the least what I'm looking for um, appealing to me personally.
Sort of it's structured upon delusion.
I'm not gonna make that statement. You can make that
I'll
statement.
make that
I'm not gonna
statement.
make a statement. I'm not gonna say it's structured on delusion. I think it goes to. I'm not sure, and obviously it's a case by case basis, and I don't think that we should assume that everyone's doing great. And I know plenty of people that have everything you could ever want, and they're miserable. Um, and I know people that have very, average means, and they're as happy as you can be. Uh, so it's not so much that. I think it's more so about like how comfortable they are with showing something more than something that's pleasant, you know. And that's because I don't want to say that just because you make artwork that is aesthetically appealing that like you're a shallow person. That's ridiculous. But I do. It does make me wonder, like how comfortable you would be to explore something that's uncomfortable. That piece right there behind your laptop here is a piece about um, the journey from being healthy to taking your own life, which is an homage to one of my best childhood friends who developed schizophrenia and then, whilst in reactionary stages of getting back on medication, sadly took his own life. And it's represented by this long journey going upwards, and then at the very top, it goes from like a child to an adult to an old man in this very short period. Because it was one of those things where like I spoke to him within a week and a half before that happened, and at that point in time, I didn't even know that he was mentally ill. He had never divulged that to me. It developed in his 20s, and we weren't in the same state, so there's no way to know. It's very sad, and I'm very okay to explore like the ideas around this sort of stuff because it's something that like I resonate with this experience and this person who I loved, and I wanted them to be, um, you know, not forgotten, at least by myself to myself. Not that I would, but like I wanted to acknowledge this thing. And I think it's kind of one of those things where it's not so much about you have to be comfortable to explore those topics. I think people get anxious, and rightfully so, of when you explore those topics, there's going to be a lot of people that will not give a flying fuck about whatever's behind it or the meaning or significance. And then you'll find people that will. Um, So I've always been curious if it's, if some of the capacity of some people to explore um, uh, unpleasant and unfavorable things might be subcultural, might be the way you're brought up, might be your circles, might be um, just a matter of where you are. I grew up with a girl who um, we didn't talk a lot, and the one time we did speak, I accidentally offended her. But she's very popular and she's very pretty. But I associated her with this is so fucking cliche. I associated her with these other like this group of like 5 or 6 girls that would like constantly remind me of how quote unquote weird I was. We were 14, 15, it was the 90s, so they'd call me sketchy. Um, and then I've not very closely, but like I've kept kind of tabs on her specifically because she got very successful in art, specifically in fashion. And it was just kind of like an interesting thing to see at one point in my life. This person who had like not been okay to have like I don't know how to word this. This person who had seemed very closed off to have conversations about my artwork in the same space where she was making artwork. My artwork was like visibly. It was obvious I listened to Nine Inch Nails. It was like trying new stuff. It was not. It was debatably terrible, but in comparison to everything else going on there, it stuck out. And because I was trying stuff, experimenting, and she never really had any interest in talking about it. And now she is like, I've seen her social media, and she's like, talking about how like great, individualism is and creative freedom. And so it's just interesting to watch, like, as people grow, part of me has always wondered, like, oh, if we cross paths now, like, would we have a more, um, you know, capability to talk about stuff that I like to explore and have always kind of explored? Because, nothing to do with her as a person, maybe at that point in her life, social pressures and stuff like that. High school's stupid. People get teased for being weird. And I grew up in a very cookie cutter town. Part of me wonders if this was a thing where, like, after that, if this part of her grew, or if this part of her was always there and just was never felt comfortable to come out until she started getting rewarded for being a little more unique. So, there's always that possibility, I think, with everyone, and we're all at kind of different places in our journey at all times. Um,
Would you,
if that makes sense?
yeah, do you feel like she's, based off of what she's presenting through social media or whatever, does it seem like she's broaching into that territory of like what is more taboo relative to fashion or
I would say
or
that
those
she
things?
signals that. I don't know if it's accurate or not.
Mm,
Everything you put on social media is some sort of a marketing thing, but I don't know if it's authentic. I'm not
right.
saying that it's not. I just don't know.
Yeah, because it's like again that now there's definitely a turn towards more of vulnerability and authenticity, and like how then
Well,
is
see, here's the
again.
thing. I don't agree with that. I think that there's more of a turn towards signaling those things.
But that's
Right?
exactly the point that I'm
Yeah.
making, and like even just the ceremony of this type of interview of like it, because this isn't a short thing for anyone's attention span to just get a bite of it, and then they can interpret any vague statement in any way that they want and then drift into their own conclusions of what that means. But rather this is a call towards more of a, like, even in its own way of a presentation of like what's a new way of considering interactions between men. Like where do we hold that space for um the exploration of mental health altogether,
Sure.
and like these really deeper qualities of what is otherwise taboo that are extremely relevant in our lives, and even as is presented in your artwork that like elicits a particular feeling of unsettled, but at the same time that it's very natural, it's very organic, it's very it's tasteful truly, in ways that are, for me, like you have to, there's something very personal
Hmm.
about it.
Yeah, but
You know,
at the same time, and I know I've made this comment before, it's never to signal that in any capacity or metric that stuff that I do has more value than anyone else, or stuff that is just visually appealing. I think it's very easy to start saying like, "Hey, I like this, so this is better, and this sucks," and you can see that in human behavior when you talk about like music. It's like, "Oh, Taylor Swift sucks." It's like, no, does she? Because she's selling millions of records, so I think she's killing it. It's just not for me. It's not what I want out of music. It's not what I write musically. It's not the type of lyrical content that I resonate with. I'm sure there's a song or two that if I was drunk, I'd be like, hell yeah. But in general, I could really not care less about that artist. But I'll never say she sucks. She's a wild success. So if you take that type of attitude towards like everything else creatively, um, I think it's just good to kind of keep yourself in check. Of like, it's the whole us versus them type thing. Of I can sit here and say like, well, I don't know why this person's getting all this attention because they make this vapid bullshit, and I'm over here doing this, and each piece takes me fucking months, and they crank this out in 3 hours. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, like, there's people that like that stuff, and that's for them. And it's up for you to decide whether or not you like it or not. And there's even stuff that like I don't identify with, but I can appreciate aesthetically. If I was a house designer, there's definitely some artist in that area where it'd be like, yeah, this makes sense. So you get a nice, warm, sunny house, and you have like a tan color aesthetic, like SoCal or Iberian. Then you want something like this. You don't want my dramatic shit. Like that's not the point of this, though. And I think the only thing that I like about this sort of stuff is like that's not for sale. I'm not trying to sell it. If somebody really wanted it, I would entertain the idea because I am poor. But that's not the point of that. It's almost my own exploration into how to visually represent certain things that I know and have felt my whole life. And that's no more or less important or culturally relevant than anything else. And that's kind of why, dialing back to your initial conversation, starter is like I don't, I don't think that art as a whole. I mean, barring maybe like one or 10 pieces, will ever really strike a cultural significance. I think there's too much of it, and there's too many dialogues, and that's I think a good thing. I think actually in some capacity, the more art there is, uh, the more watered down it becomes, which is I think kind of nice because we grew up in a world where there was like you're here and then there's one way to go up, and now it's just kind of like you choose your own adventure and just make stuff.
and it's again, for at least me in my process, in my creating art, it's my mind is always in it as a continual exercise, and it's a devotional process of like keeping myself tight. And of course, like there's an appeal for particular people that find a resonance with even just everything that I'm presenting
Sure.
and it gives more substance for it. But otherwise, it's how can I just keep on, just grooving that flow forward with like, okay, how is creation wanting to express itself for this new cycle coming to my life, and just trusting that. And I always have something to go back to if this is an abysmal failure in the idea of where it has potential of going towards.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also think that it's worth mentioning or re-emphasizing on the importance of understanding like different tastes and subcultures, um, not only creatively but like geographically, spiritually, religiously, all this sort of stuff. You interact with different people, and they have different perspectives. Now, I've never seen your art, um, but I know there are some artists that I have seen that I know people like, and I know that I don't like. Um, there are some people that are really good at making stuff that is kind of psychedelic, and I don't appreciate that sort of stuff. It's
Mhm.
not to say that it's bad. It's just not for me. It's not my taste. Um, I associate it with certain things that like I also don't like, so it's not like I have a redeeming way to get around to it. I also associate it with a certain age. Like I grew up, in the 80s and 90s, and like Hot Topic with having like black light posters and stuff like that was like a moment in my life that I quickly grew out of. It's not to say that because I view myself as growing out of it that it's beneath me. It's just I went this way, and some people stayed in that area and went this way. Which is why I really like the idea of like, you know, something I say to myself a lot is I utterly refuse to take no for an answer, but if I'm getting no for an answer, I need to reevaluate how I'm asking the question and who I'm asking the question to. Because if I want to do this with people or make stuff that people like, and I'm trying to shove it down the wrong throat, like, it's never going to work. If you find, for lack of a less cliche phrase, like your people, or people that like stuff that you make, and you show it to them and say, hey, all right, cool. This person's going to hate this. This person's going to like this. I have a hoodie that I designed, and I was real curious to see if anyone in Texas was going to make a comment about it. And I went to this bar for a concert, and the bartender was like audibly in love with it and asked to take a picture of it. And they were chatting. It turns out he's from Boston. So I'm like, okay, so this very New England humor thing I have going on is resonating with the Boston guy in Texas. No one else has noticed it, which is fine. It's not for me to say like that it's better or it's worse or whatever. It's like, okay, so this reference resonates with this crowd.
You're speaking about the Christ figure Ben Affleck.
Yes, yeah, Ben Affleck.
Uh-huh.
Ben Affleck, the saint of bad choices. Yeah, it's. I think that's kind of relevant to a lot of creative endeavors, and then kind of keeping things in mind. All of this rambling. I can't imagine anyone's going to listen to ramble as long. Kind of comes back to the whole idea of like trying to put art, this vague term with all these different things, up on a pedestal. Sorry, to have it make some sort of more of a cultural impact. I don't think that's like a reality. And if we could make it a reality, I'd be curious to know what benefit it has.
Because you and me, we're sharing the space, and for whatever reason, circumstance or etc., that we've converged in our path, but we're arriving to this point from very different angles.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And like, I welcome and I relish the opportunity for people to jump to conclusions about even my band and what I represent because of the associations with it. It's like even that is like within the mythology and the archetypal uh, flavor of like the coyote spirit within like Native American traditions.
Yeah.
Of just like because of how brazenly ignored like the the fundamental reality is outside of the narrative of what reality is in the current times that we're moving through. That's like, and how much even again because of, in my opinion, there's a hyper compartmentalization of people within their own individuality, where like there isn't much of a communal experience, but there's the idea of community as is generated within programming and messaging, but it's still missing the substance that I think is um very, in my opinion, like of course like a lot of things have to change for a lot of things to change, but I don't think because of the way that things had become so pressurized into this continual like momentum of enterprise and industry, that in my opinion that a lot of what we're really wanting to find, in my opinion, can come from letting like releasing and looking at what's available currently from a different angle. Like how are we approaching community genuinely, and like what do we see as solutions that are, like again, these different types of things can only come from the ability to slow down and have the conversations and pick our heads up from what we're looking at so obsessively, and consider like what else is going on.
Yeah, I actually had a really interesting conversation about community. I think I mentioned that I have a YouTube show that I'm about to release episode one.
Mm-hmm.
I already have the audio for 2 and 3, and episode 3 talks about community. And I'm talking with a very good friend of mine who's Portuguese. She still lives in Portugal. About her definition of community and what that actually means. And I generally think that, like, growing up, community to me meant like looking out for your neighbors and stuff like that. Living in a very small um, New England town where like a lot of people didn't pass through. If you came to town, you're coming to town. There's nowhere to go through it. And so you have this like very like pleasant community where generally people um, like understood like that negative behaviors would eventually come back and bite them. Um, Not that they were all deterrent related behaviors, but like it was just kind of like you felt safe and kind of known, even with people that you didn't like, because you had such a small knit whatever. And if someone were to come into town and rob someone's house, then the community starts kind of like, hey, look, we're looking out for each other now. There's a threat, and we're bonded by this geographical space. And that's like what community meant to me growing up personally. And then you start using more abstract versions of community, whether it be like a community of a certain group or a community now, I think, of like certain interests. Hearing people talk about activities and community around activities is always interesting to me because I've never experienced anything like that. All the things that I've been involved in tend to be um, a community on the face, but not at this level. Like you'd have your like playing music, for example, especially in Massachusetts. Like you'd have your people that you resonated with really tightly, but those weren't a lot and not enough to be a community. And then you'd find like trying to explore elsewhere that like it felt very in some way, shape, or form like high schooly and cliquish. Um, and I think that a lot of people use the word community in a certain way, but the way that they actually engage with the community is, I think, in a self-serving purpose. So, like on my social media, when I do go on it, I'm trying to get off it as much as possible. Like, if I have someone that is a friend of mine who's doing something, I share it and I say, hey, this dude I used to hang out with, nice guy. He's putting out an EP. Check it out. All my friends doing photography. I really like it. Check it out. I'd go meet an artist. I'd share their artwork. Check it out. Took a picture of an artist the other day. Um, gave her props. We're not friends. I don't know her. We had a chat about like her artistic experience for like 20 minutes. And we talked about a random T-shirt designer that we both realized we owned shirts from. Um, and that was it. And I don't know if I'll ever see her again, but like that's my attitude of like, hey, if you want a community in some capacity, I think it's more so about like getting out there and even in little ways of like promoting someone, which is so fucking easy on social media. Just giving attention or like or space to someone. And I think that's only relevant because I don't see 95% of people doing anything like that unless they're somehow benefiting from it. So
Mhm.
I get skeptical of some creative people um, talking about a bigger community because I don't see any action going on there. And then on top of that, and I can't make a statement about this in Austin because I am 4 months new here and I would not be surprised if things are happening. But, one of the things that I think would be, nicer to see more of are people that have the ability to make pieces of artwork and have creative endeavors, do so, and then participate in things that benefit the actual community itself of people that are in need. Um, when I used to play in a hardcore band, we would play shows, and I don't know, maybe at least once every 8 months, someone in my circle of peers would be organizing a fundraiser show, which I think is like very, what's the word I'm looking for? Not prominent, like regular in like the punk rock music scene of like, hey, we're gonna raise money for this thing and come hang out because we're not doing this for money. It's nice to pay off our you know string budget or whatever, but I've been involved in shows that raised money for housing for abused women and children, um, rape crisis counseling, Planned Parenthood, stuff like that. And it's all a bunch of like straight white dudes playing music that no one wants to listen to, but like, hey, we're doing this
For the
thing.
cause.
This is our thing, and we're just acknowledging, hey, like we don't need this money. We don't. This is really our social thing, but we can give to um, the community, and I think that is one way that like artistic endeavors can actually have a real impact on the community around it. And I'm not saying it's not happening here. I'm just still getting my bearings, so I don't know.
Well, I have we'll talk about it after the interview about an event that happens on Thursday night that's just like a couple blocks away from here that I think you'll find good resonance with. And
Okay.
again, it's just like because of the freedom that is permitted to me by the lifestyle that I choose that, and like the because of how simply I live, that it gives me a lot of opportunity to take risks and have a lot of. I value my time so much that like anything that I'm doing, I see as relevant with what my message is.
Mm,
So everything is confirming what I'm fixated on.
sure.
You know what I mean? And like call that my own flavor of autism. But because of that curiosity and call it my own desperation to seek community, but like also like not being lost in. I think even the points that you were making, even going back to your own history and that small communal experience that was more about like functionality and just like okay, hey, like we I got your back. I'm watching. I got your back. You got my back. But like that's pretty much. And we're just doing our own thing. That it's like even that like there's so much value in um like individual identity.
Yeah.
And then we could say a lot. If, maybe that was part of your experience in Portugal. I don't know enough about the Portuguese culture, but I certainly have seen a lot of um, like group identity with Spanish people that have come and traveled through the United States, and I've had interactions with where there's this interesting like they're very colorful and they're really there's a party quality to them, but like it's hard for them in my experience, and I'm not speaking for all Spaniards, but like from what I've seen of those groups, that there's a hesitation to have in one-on-one conversations that separate them from their group identity. There's almost like an anxiety around where they stand within their own expression outside of other people filling in the gaps. Like how there might be a sense of tension around holding the space for silence and giving space to think about what is the appropriate response from personal perspective.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Uh, well, I don't. I don't. Um, Specifically on Spanish culture. There being inside of Spain, and Spain's maybe a good example, but actually Italy's a better example. But like inside of Spain, there's multiple groups. There's the Catalan who don't want to be part of Spain anymore. I don't know anything about Galician in the northeast or how they differentiate, but I know they're there. I know the most about Castilian Spanish, and then also inside of Spain, like there are people that are Basque, which is a totally different group, but still they say, "Oh, I'm from Spain." I think Italy is a better thing to think about. I have a lot of Italian friends, and it was interesting, but also like kind of amusing. And I don't mean that in like a condescending way, but like it's just kind of like interesting and amusing to think like, oh, we think of like Italians like it's like this group, but then if like you talk to Italians like from the north and from Sicily and from the south, like they don't like each other. Which is, we have that here in the States. Even in New England, which is a much smaller capacity. Um, I don't actually have anything against people from Connecticut, but I will make fun of you if you're in Connecticut. I met a girl today, walking down the street, she was wearing a Boston shirt. And I was like, oh, where are you from? She's like, I'm actually from Connecticut. And I immediately started making fun of her. And she was like, she's used to it. It's good humor, so it's not like I'm bullying this random girl.
Mm.
But it is kind of like some people have much more serious issues with each other, and a lot of it, I think, comes back to class, from my understanding. Um, Certain parts, I don't want to misspeak because I don't recall the specifics, but certain parts of Italy look at other parts of Italy as, I think our equivalent would be like redneck or like bogan if you're Australian. They just look down on other parts of Italy, which is like, you know, not to get too far off track, but like it's I try very hard not to paint with a broad brush, because everyone's obviously individual and there's specifics and things that I don't have the time to learn. But yeah,
just the observation of patterns, and of course, like I just use like the Spanish as an example. We could easily even talk about like smaller, like community experiments, even anywhere on the West Coast that I've like been able to drop in on. Of like, there's a homogenized concept of what like creative function is within that space, and like everybody does everything together, and that's the idea of community done right. Whereas like not many things are being done from what I've witnessed, and like that it's in theory moving towards something that has potential, but if it's capped at thinking that this is the arrival, then I think that it often because it seems secure and it seems everybody's happy, and there isn't that ability to confront or even to like be open for critical reflection from other perspectives. Like how can we make things better? Like it's like we can acknowledge that this is good, but how, like, where can things maybe expand into something even more relevant, and again, that even calls into question like who then is the one defining what is more relevant?
well, that's I think that's probably the thing that, going back to my original statement of like we're going to differ on like what's the point of this. Whoever defines as relevant is obviously up to you specifically. There's a lot of political unrest and there's a lot of things happening in our country now, and you'll see a lot of things on social media from smaller accounts that you do not see coverage of in mainstream media. I see that there's now a new, I think it's new. I don't know if it's just popped up from this or if it's been there the whole time and they've just been more active. But now there's a new version of like the Black Panther movement in Pennsylvania, and their whole thing is, hey, like, you're not coming into our neighborhood and pulling this authoritarian shit. I haven't seen anything about that in the news. I know my parents haven't either because they would have mentioned something. Um, Also, like all the references I made earlier about like the little fundraisers that we'd make, or little punk shows. Like we weren't by any means like super super popular, but a couple $100 towards a cause is a good cause. And beyond this, there was never any press about it. There's no people. Oh, look at these idiots playing discordant music that no one likes, raising money for this because it's just not interesting to people. So I think it comes down to doing something with, like, at least from a zoomed out enough perspective of being altruistic about it for the sake of helping someone out. And if you can use your creativity to do that, I generally think that that's a rewarding experience. And like, it doesn't need to be viewed as relevant because it is something that will, in some capacity, help. Whether or not it has an impact, we don't know. Throwing down a bag of sand in front of a tsunami wave might not help, but if enough bags of sand get there, then it'll kind of help. And I think that's kind of where I get weird on using the word community. There has rarely been a time when I was like, oh, this is a community. But even in those communities, like ethereal, whatever you want to call it, abstract communities, like, so not like people living with each other. Like when we would leave this common area, it's not that we were strangers, but like we would not interact the same way. We'd go off into other scenarios. So I kind of like the idea of like scenes. I guess maybe that's just a word I'm more comfortable with than community. Of, hey, in this little scene over here, where these things are happening, blah blah blah, and you interact with people here in this way, and you go here in this way. Mm-hmm. And trying to make a massive cultural difference from conversations about art for the most part. It's I think they'd have to have like a cultural shift on the role of not the artist but of the individual in the country in general, of like, hey, what is the point of, not the point, what is the civic duty of someone who lives in this country, like, to help out someone else, whether that be small or big or financial or volunteering and stuff. And that's all. I've always found it interesting that is generally described as activism, when part of me thinks that's just like being like a good citizen, or it's a cheesy thing I ever said, but like just being a good person and like acknowledging that people in your realm are, maybe in need of something even small, and finding some way to do that. And if you can use like your artistic clout to do that, even once every 6 months, like if everyone did that, everything would be so much better. And I think it'd be more of a general understanding of like the positive effects of like creative stuff and capitalism. Because you go and talk to someone who's poor about art, and they're gonna not give a shit, and I don't expect them to.
That's a lot of certainly where this experimentation is coming from, is more of like, what is the consolidation process with us coming together for like recognizing, for instance, that those calls to cause as a musician with your bands, of like, hey, come on out and pay the entry fee, and this will go to this particular cause in need. Like there's always like the appeal within humanity to rise someone out of despair.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And like recognizing that that's a formula that is successful. You know what I mean? And what then is it if we're calling into factor even like even in the example of like all these different scenes, and like they have a place and they have a relevancy, but it's all of those things are structured upon like the societal framework and the institutional framework that is maybe needing to be revisited and called into question, of like how much is it really serving us collectively, or has it become in many different ways corrupted into these different like separate aspects that like we can't even touch, you know, so we can't have there's no conversation, there's no debate about them. It's just like you accept them for what they are, and if you don't like them, then get out of here.
Well, I think the caveat to what I'm kind of describing is that like the dude that I used to, and I say dude, there was a couple of ladies in some bands. Um, the folks that I like played in bands with, where we played these little crappy shows and raised like a little bit of money. Um, like I think one of the things about them, and maybe this is like something that you find in like counterculture movements, especially things that come from like, I guess you want to call it like the punk and post-punk movement. Of like it's very synonymous with like being angry at the status quo. And so when you have, even if it's not everyone there is like fully on board with everything, like when you have like a general angst against the world around you,
Mm-hmm.
it probably feels easier to say, like, what can I do with this anger or this unease of what's happening? I think, especially right now, with the very strange political landscape we're in, um, it's probably feeling for a lot of people like a little choice inundation on how you can help, because everything is pretty fucked. And all the problems that we had 2 years ago are still around. I never got an update on Flint, Michigan. Like, I don't know if that situation ever got fully fixed. I know that people lost interest in it. I know that there's global issues that people are very passionate about. I see a lot of things about one country right now not getting as much attention as other countries have gotten. People are like heated, and I think it's just, I have some particular beliefs about people in general, um, that kind of explain a lot of this. So I think expecting like the general populace to step up and start suddenly doing shit is a big ask. But I also think that change happens in increments. And so, getting involved with something that's already happening and sharing with people around you and meeting people and saying, hey, I'm doing this, like, does not mean that you'll find more people that want to do it, but you will at least have the invitation there for someone saying, hey, that sounds awesome. I want to get involved. Like, that's a great way to start doing something. Like, you're asking, how do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be a movement. I mean, there are artists I know that are great and do give a shit, but like, don't have the time to volunteer, or don't have the ability to donate pieces of work for a nonprofit because they are, working a little job and trying to make it as, a creative person in 2026 now, and they just don't have like excess to give. It's understandable.
So even just recognizing that pattern of constriction around like access and freedom of time,
Sure.
to even be able to breathe and look at different ways of approaching life itself, and again, like even bringing it back to that point around bills, and even just again like
Well, I'll even call out the elephant in the room. I'm not doing anything right now. I'm personally not spending any time volunteering or anything. I will, at some point in time, try and find something that I want to do. My personal journey has been kind of wonky, and right now I'm still just like getting like caught up from all the shit that's happened in the past couple of years, like financially and emotionally and like life journey wise. Um, I'm not like at a place where like I feel like I have the emotional capacity to like try and organize an event, which I've done before, and it can be fucking exhausting. So like I have a lot of respect for people that do organize stuff, but also like I haven't quite figured out what's going on here yet in most capacities. So there'll be something at some point in time.
But do you feel like you like need to do something?
I don't think I need to do something. I think that there is a level of what am I looking for? I think there's a feeling of worth that you feel when you do something for a stranger and get nothing back, um, just because you can, that you don't find in most other experiences in life. And this is something that I learned very directly from a person that I might have mentioned the other day when we met, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But like I had a role model growing up who was like a awesome rock star of a human being, just kind and genuine and giving and in a balanced way and humble and would never tell you what he's doing. And it's just like that. So much respect. He's older. I don't know if they make them like they used to regarding him, but like I take understanding from that person a lot of like there's so many things you can do in this life, but obviously if any of them can help someone else get the next step, like that's something that we just don't value enough in the human experience.
It's sort of listening to that, and I'm not definitely not trying to reduce what you're saying, but it's like and also type of thing of like in that particular school of thought, of like finding such a like an enriching sense of fulfillment, even if it's just in the passing of that moment of like knowing that you helped an individual on their path, and then the sun sets and that's the end of that story. But there's no oftentimes what I think happens with a lot of people in like Flint, Michigan is a good example, or like there's so many other examples, even with all those crises um causes that were supported, and it's like, oh, we had the show and they, and then we did our part, and then and like money, sort of like how money, like I'm not reducing anything to this, but just as this example of how often it is the case within the world that we're living, that it's just like money is thrown at something thinking that that's the attention that it needs, and it's like, okay, figure it out, you got all the money, and it's just like, well, maybe there's more to the equation regarding like the follow through and like the accountability and like recognizing like these deeper structural patterns that allow for these to continue to
Sure,
circulate.
yeah. I think everything. I've been having this funny old man moment lately, where I'm like, dude, everything really truly comes down to these dumb old sayings that like I never gave a shit about growing up. Like you're completely describing if you give a man a fish, you know, yeah, it's gonna solve a problem short term, but it's not really gonna like improve generational opportunity and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that that gets into politics, which is a whole other 8 hours that I'm not going to give you. That's wild. I do think that the one thing that is kind of relevant that we've stepped around a little bit, but you're stepping around a lot there, is like, uh, I think that cell phones are wonderful, capable little devices that can make a lot of things easier, but I think people need to get the fuck off social media. I think it's terrible. It started off as useful in a certain capacity, and now it is just like inundation of way too much stuff. And I think I have like 900 and something followers, and majority of the time, if I post like a story, like 30 people see it. So, like, what is the fucking point of this? Uh, Especially when you realize, like, if you're, I'm not going to assume anything, but, or about whomever, but like, if you're like really against Trump, it's worth constantly reminding that, like, every time you scroll by an ad on Facebook or Instagram, irrelevant if you click it or not, like, that company is giving Meta money for your eyes looking at it, and Meta donated to Trump. You know, so did Google. Like, there's. It's not to say that we suddenly can't have to go back to like '96, but in some capacity, I think putting some healthy space between these corporations that depend upon your attention span so much, but also like pervert your attention span, um, would be like beneficial to everyone.
Especially, speaking for myself, 13 years ago, I left social media and I haven't been a part of it, and just that's the society that I exist within, but it's not the culture that I adhere to.
Sure.
So it's just always interesting to witness from my perspective and having interactions and like valuing this type of human connection above all else, of like how people's minds, again, like how the power of influence and the power of these narratives, and like how it's so separated from what is really going on, and how like these how enraging it can be because of like how much there's a inundation of information about what's going on in Palestine, and like that's uh definitely a relevant quality of the human experience that needs to be discussed and addressed, of like how that's again, it's part of the bigger patterns within colonialization and the imperialism. But like, where do we see that mirrored in different ways within the life in the world that we're living in, within the empire itself? And where do we see little by little that we're in different ways becoming separated from our own relationship with like the rooted earth, and like knowing our relationship with the foods that we're consuming, and like again, like even just having a relationship with just generally the integration of animals within our lives, or even children, like how for so many of these different groups, that there's no relevancy with like the generations that are coming up, and it's like these hive minds that are often, again, we could talk about a lot of different things, but like how the circulation of different drugs and the circulation of these, just the momentum within these mindsets, that for some people they're able to ride it, until their dying days, but a lot, from what I witnessed, that a lot of people get spun off, and that they have a real hard fall, and then it's again, like there's just so many different qualities around like what are we what are we recognizing as healthy and sustainable, and also like how do we find new ways of just being, yeah, like exploring our own psyche and our own internal process in healthy ways, without getting like lost in endless like pattern recognition of like what are the problems.
Sure.
You know what I
I
mean?
think I think the to answer your question, which I can answer, can actually answer that, is that's up for everyone to decide for themselves, because everyone has their own different relationship with um, these unhealthy things, and everyone also has their different relationship with how much they give a shit. There are some people that can understand that something is bad, and justify doing it anyways, and not feel bad about justifying it. And there's also people who can do the same thing, but then feel guilt about justifying it, and maybe they'll change into understanding like the importance of changing behavior. But like, I don't think that we're culturally headed in that direction in any capacity. Um, as a whole, I think things need to get like insanely bad for things to really pop off, and it's gonna be like restrictive liberal states like putting in laws that maybe start to change the capabilities of some of these companies and stuff like that. Like California is a great state to use an example. I've worked in construction for a long time, and there was always a joke of like, oh, okay, like this product, this roof sealant, they sell it all around the country, but when they sell it in the state of California, they're required to have this cancer warning on it, but they're not required to have that cancer warning in the other states. So the can states like, this product is known to be carcinogenic in the state of California, and then the fucking moronic joke would make it like, oh, it's a good thing we're not in the state of California, it must be safe. It is it change, like in terms of culture in that regard, has to come from enough people getting unhappy about the cost of something to try and push through some sort of restrictive law. And currently, I feel like culturally, most people enjoy the privilege of convenience and don't acknowledge the cost of it. So, my favorite hill to die on is Airbnb. I've used Airbnb. I don't know if I'll use it again at this point in my life, but, don't set me on fire if I do. If it's an option that makes sense, I'll use it. But I don't think it should be legal. It started off as, hey, if you own a house and you have an extra room, because we have bed and breakfasts in New England. I went to like actual B&Bs, and it was you'd go into someone's house and there'd be like a room, and they'd set you up and you'd sleep, and in the morning they'd literally make you breakfast or leave stuff out for you to have breakfast, and you'd go on your way. That's what it started off as. And now it's literally like people will like rent houses or buy houses and then rent them out as Airbnb. And it's like, yeah, that's convenient for when you're traveling if it's cheaper, if it provides you like a certain level of luxury at a discounted rate as opposed to a hotel. But that's absolute shit for the housing market. Wouldn't you rather be able to buy a fucking house by having more things available to you? But that's not in our cultural dialogue because people like the convenience of it. We've normalized this. There was an interview once where it said, I forget who said it, and it doesn't really matter because I think it's super true. It's like Americans have done a really good job at like normalizing corruption and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, this isn't corruption per se, but like even in our politics, there's some wild shit. But sticking on convenience, everyone sees these Amazon-related reports about workers are treated like shit, and no one does different because we're too addicted to the convenience. I've used Amazon. I don't even think about it in the moment, but at a later time, if I do, I'm like, oh, fuck, I should really not be giving this like loser Lex Luthor wannabe asshole any money. I grew up on mom and pop shop culture. Like that's what I want, like future people to have. And this is the exact antithesis. But it's so easy when it's convenient. People, in my opinion, generally would need to start understanding that the medicine is the poison, is what the saying? Of like, yeah, we're doing all these things and we're enjoying all these things, but those are contributing to poisoning the well of like the community we live in. I don't remember what question I'm responding to there, but I think you can derive.
I think that's just the nature. I mean, because I haven't even asked one of the structured questions.
Jesus Christ, ask
you know
me
what I mean? But I think it's all in the nature of the flow of it. And
sure.
This is what's relevant in our connection.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like that's like this is great to have as a go-to. And like in different ways, you've answered some of these. Like, and if I'm going, if this was a test, like I'd give you a pass for some of them so far, and of course I'll go back to the other ones, but to the limit of your own fatigue, or if you have the enduring capacity to continue, on and on and on this goes. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like, again, like yeah, it's such a good thought experiment. It's just good exercise of just like looking at these things from different angles, and even including the, in my opinion, sort of the compartmentalization of the concept of community and like how like we can be frustrated and we can recognize the blatant disregard for the collective and these decisions that are being made on like on these corporate conglomerate levels, and it's just like who yeah I don't who what the fuck are you gonna do about it? Can't, because this is the nature of the game, and it's like until, in my opinion, we begin to prototype and like the sharp and intelligent minds of the collective are just so exhausted by the obvious patterns and how they're just replicating upon themselves that they're like, okay, well, I'm willing to now, or I desire to just do things differently and find different aspects of these different um like scenes or these different cultural containers that are also fed up with their patterns, and they want to come together in different ways of like again like fully embracing the individual and what has been their journey up to that point, but like what from the basic building blocks of our human experience where we all can agree that these are the fundamentals that give rise to vitality, and these are the fundamentals that give us a sense of autonomy and a genuine sense of security. And then from that shared experience that we value that, and we want to invest energy into making sure that they stand so that we can take the risks to journey and explore the things that are of our interest, knowing full well that if we ever come to that point that we can return and have a quality of recalibration and reflection and reintegration, and again like these types of things that I think aren't even in the like in the consideration of many people.
Sure. Yeah, I think. Well, I think for me, in a lot of the topics relevant of what the topic is. The show that I'm working on is based on um, general broad topics being discussed on a personal level with different people. Um, but a lot of them really kind of come down to uh, culture issues and like not having a cultural identity. You know, the United States historically, and like for someone from the Northeast, and maybe this is why the Northeast is like what it is in some capacity. Like everyone there is extremely proud of their heritage. You meet people and they're like, I'm Irish or I'm Italian. They're not. They're American, but their forefathers and mothers were in these places. And that's very important to people. I know people that have like family crest tattoos, and I think it's cheesy, but it's important to them. So it's like part of their identity. And so I think the whole, hey, we're a country of immigrants resonates really strong up in those cultures. The cultures being
In the
the
Northeast,
Northeast, at least.
yeah.
I mean, I haven't lived in other places well enough to say if it's a northern thing or if it's just Northeast.
Well, I'm from Philly, and like with what you
I
just
call
said, it's
Philly,
basically
yeah.
the same thing.
I call
It's
Philly
just
the
you
North.
see
Yeah,
that,
Philly's still
yeah.
Northeast in my book.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the end. But and then like when you look at like a lot of traditionally conservative rhetoric, a lot of it is over Christian country. And it's funny to me because like a lot of the people I know that come from like Irish and Italian backgrounds are the big ones that you hear a lot about. The most vocal maybe. They're all also coming from Christian backgrounds, but it's not part of the identity. The faith is part of their life, and over here, it's not part of their identity as a community.
Mm-hmm.
At least from what I experienced with people. No one's ever brought up religion to me, like just being out and talking about like family, whatever. They want to know like, oh, where's your family from and stuff like this. No, we have my family grew up here, and we go to the motherland and all this. It's like, oh, that's cool, blah blah. No one mentions religion. So when you compare like even just even just two different like sects of American subcultures, understanding that there is wildly many more different ideologies and groups and overlapping groups and experiences with people. It's it's really hard to get people to have um, like a huge cultural shift. So when you start thinking about like all of these problems and friction points and understand that it's in this like weird wild world where I watched a man scan his palm in Whole Foods to ring out. It's like, buddy, why does Jeff Bezos need your like? How do you not to start sounding like a tinfoil hat, but like there's got to be a point where you don't give brutal capitalists like your DNA. You know, you're heading in that direction. Um, so to have conversations about like things like art and music and dance and all the other things and their cultural significance and how they can be more important and stuff. It's not to say that there's not a valid conversation there or that there's not stuff to explore. I do think it is the very privileged place to be concerned about how artwork is consumed in our culture. And it's a very strange place to be. What is it? I'm really bad with names. I'm blanking on I think his name's Andy something, but the guy who does Obey as like a street artist, streetwear brand type thing. It's always interesting to watch someone go from. And I don't know his story super well, so pardon me if I'm fucking it up. But it's always interesting to watch someone go from being like a street artist and he was like kind of like a graffiti artist doing this, this tag around, and then like, and now it's become a brand. And it's like, if that's the goal, to go from being a creator to being a person with employees replicating your work, that conversation is one way. If we're talking about cultural significance, that conversation is another way. If we're talking about, personal relationships with art and creative expression, that is, a third way. And maybe there's some overlap there, but I think that's, kind of the point where it's like, so we're having these different conversations using the same word, and it's also all in a level of privilege because I mean, it's nice to be able to make things that are creative, but also like there's a lot of people that would like to be doing that can't, whether that you mean they just can't do that sort of stuff. They're not like what I'm looking for. They don't feel capable in that capacity, or they just don't have the time to learn a skill. I was lucky enough to get art lessons as a child outside of school for cheap. Awesome. And very grateful not only for my family for letting me do that, but also for my teachers there, who I'm still in touch with. And I also basically consider family. But also, like, I know like a lot of people don't have that opportunity. And it's not to say that we should, I think, feel bad about having like that opportunity, that privilege. I do think it should hone the conversation in some capacity as to, what relevance do other people have for art? Because there are plenty of people that just collect art, and I don't want to make a broad statement on that because I don't know enough people that actually collect art and have the financial means to actually collect art. But I know there's lots more people that don't have the ability to even engage with this type of culture or haven't been exposed to it or don't want to,
Yeah, and again, there's so many different conversations about, artist collectors and, what their motives are. And even, some friends that I have of, their hesitancy around getting involved with those different tracks is just like that in their mind that some people are just using art as a way of having a tax write-off and that it's a way of like laundering money, and that's
Sure.
that's a truth. And some, we
you
could
know-
even talk about different how that's tied to politics and all of these different things.
I think my immediate response to that is like, if you're in a position where you're able to sell art to someone and they're collecting art for nefarious reasons, that's your choice to engage with that. You know what I mean?
Bingo.
Or to pursue that.
Again,
and I wouldn't hold you to a moral cross if you're doing tax evasion, or if you're selling to someone who's doing tax evasion. That's the risk they're taking, and honestly, they'll probably get away with it.
Of course.
So, it is kind of one of those things. It's like, yeah, it's very easy to focus on stuff of that nature, but I would say, like, what's the point?
Because of course, it's part of this whole conversation of like where does the art end? Where is that line drawn where it's outside of our own hands regarding art, the decisions that we're making and what we're willing to compromise on, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, wittingly or unwittingly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And how that plays into the entire
I'd be curious to know, and I don't know if you know this offhand, how many of the people that you're interviewing make art for a living? A full-time artist,
So far?
Yeah.
No one.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so everyone also has a job.
Brett, so far, yes.
Okay.
And I'm the only one that doesn't. But I'm also like a glorified homeless man.
Sure, that's fine.
So and it gives me the opportunity.
No, I'm curious. I'm curious
to
know if there'd be like any correlating difference of opinions on stuff depending upon if you're doing this as a full-time job. For me, I work a lot. I have a full-time job. After you leave, I'll go back and catch up on the stuff that I missed out on. And I also have like side work clientele.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, half of my creative endeavors are made to potentially make money. Yeah.
But it's interesting, even just as I'm watching this unfold, of like the people that I would say have an edge and are more driven to say, fuck it, let's just do it, let's get it together, are the ones that have immediately reached out to me in response to the email. And then things are starting to trickle in, that people that are, maybe to different degrees living in that way, that are like, full-time within their arts, are asking me questions about the interview and asking me questions about the layout of it and all these different things.
Yeah.
Well,
my attitude is, and I said this to someone else recently, who I might talk to later on today. I don't care if I like what you're doing. I don't care if it comes out good. I am, and I'm not talking to you, just in general. I am proud of you for just doing something.
Well, thank you.
So many people just go through life and do nothing. And it is not to say that like that's a bad way to live. Some people like living like that. But when someone says, hey, I have an idea and I want to fucking see where it goes, I think that is like the hallmark of like the best potential type of life. You will never get anywhere if you don't try stuff. And I've had moments in my life where I've wanted to do things and talk myself out of them. And then like looking back, part of me was like, oh, did I talk myself out of doing this? Because I realized it'd be a lot of work and no one would like it. Why do I care if anyone likes it? If it's something I want to do. So like I can understand the hesitation anxiety or like the failure anxiety. And I also think that like failure isn't failing, right? So like if you do this series and then you find that like, hey, this did not go over well, it's like 15 people rambling for hours and no one wants to watch it. You can still keep going. You can then say, all right, cool. What's the next iteration of this? If I want to start having these dialogues, maybe we change the format or we get real strict on like how rambling we can get it. You just keep going. But, I forget who I was talking to recently, but I generally try to look at the first time I do anything as guaranteed failure that I should look forward to. If it's something I really want to do, I'm not going to get it right the first time. I'm going to do it. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to hate myself in some capacity for not thinking of certain things. And then I'm going to do it again better and just keep going. Versus, if you're so bent on something being successful right out of the gate, when it's not, because most things in life are not like overnight successes, like then you're distraught and you're no longer enjoying this thing that like you were drawn to, and that's like the wrong attitude to have. So I am always, I think that like at the end of the day, like irrelevant of anything I've ever alluded to in this conversation or in prior conversations about like styles of art that I don't resonate with, or that I don't like. At the end of the day, I still respect that person for doing something, even if it's a person coming from great privilege who doesn't have to worry about stuff. There are 8,000 other people for every person that generally does nothing, in the bridge scheme of things. Very consumer-based culture. I think it is, I don't know how to talk about spiritualism because I think that word means a lot of things to a lot of people. But to me, in whatever way I think of it, I do think that creation is like very spiritually rewarding. If Even if you hate it, there's something you're exploring inside of yourself with it. So,
that allows me to present a question.
All right.
What moves you, inspires you to be an artist, and how would you define your relationship with the source of inspiration?
I think it's a mix of two different things. Unease with personal experiences, and also I haven't found a better word because I really like the word perversion, but people automatically assume perversion is sexual perversion.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that. But like I do have this strange inner working of like, oh, I want to make something and show people, even if I know they might not get it, but like just that possibility of someone being like, yeah, I get that. It's really nice to me, especially when it comes from a place of like unease. I also have like very tongue-in-cheek, absurdist humor. So like trying to make stuff that can explore that as well, which you'll see more in the next couple of months with like more like goofy little t-shirt designs, and I'm making some stickers to just put around unbranded. I think it's a nice way to like scratch the creative itch, but a lot of it comes from this odd urge to be a performer when I fucking hate being on camera or on stage. And this unease, I think I've described it previously as like, an urge to be known in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, part of this whole interview series is really just about what you've you've shared, and it's more about the quality of attention versus the quantity of attention. And like honestly, I find value in just having the opportunity to interact with different artists that are on their own paths and just picking their brains and seeing where there's a commonality and like where there's maybe a space for bridging those gaps while also understanding that, you know, at least for myself, of like what my aim is an enduring journey. So it's just one step at a time. I see progress in my own ways, and that's valid within my own journey. But you know, how do, in my opinion, like where do we, by merit of having the opportunity to really get into these thoughts and opening up that territory, is like where are those deeper connections that maybe have a resonance amongst people that otherwise don't have the opportunity for those types of connections? You know, so it kind of gets, you know, you hit the ground running and there's already an understanding of where people are at. You know, it's like, and again, like um eye doctor, who was a person that I interviewed last week on Thursday, he's starting one of the things, one of his agendas, and what he was wanting to really propel within our interview across many different things that we were talking about, was that he's wanting to start a vandalism education program where it's again like how do we consolidate street art and graffiti and the sticker art into a more cohesive space where there's more of a like there's an agreement to different degrees, and of course, like that kind of contradicts the whole movement. But then again, it's like sort of like how do we contradict what is already a social contradiction, and like you know, like what has opened the doors open with this type of like perversion of the status quo, because it's like the sterilized and the bleached narrative that is being forced on everyone of what human experience is and like what civilization is not cutting it.
Mm.
You know what I mean? But then because those floodgates have opened, now it's become diluted of what even the meaning of these things are, and then it becomes a deeper philosophical question of like, what is the meaning of it anyway? You know, like is that not its meaning? And it's of course like part of the discovery process of an artist, in my opinion, of like that at the end of the day, like we as humans are the ones that are defining what meaning is. And like if we're driven by creation and recognizing that in many ways that the vital force follows creation, like how do we take that as responsibility? And again, like where you were speaking of just like wanting to celebrate anyone that's wanting to break out of their own machinations and stand on something is a great place to start, you know?
Sure. I think also like to broaden my statement before, like my comment about being proud of someone for doing something isn't only related to like creative endeavor. Um, I think it's more so about like the mentality of having a goal and taking steps to accomplish it. And I think that definitely comes from having people in my life historically, you know, not consistently, but over time, different characters that I was close with that refused to fix things. And I generally um, am socially attracted to problem solvers, uh, whether that be a creative internal process or problem or like a, you know, hey, I want to start a business, whatever. Um, I think it's easier to get people to change the intent of their action than it is to get well-intentioned people that are doing things to do something. Um, you know, so I don't know much about Eye Doctor Guy. I might have met him. There's a bunch of people around that studio that I have met very briefly and have only seen once. I like the sound of the course. I would be curious if I would agree with the end result. Um, I think getting into social commentary in the general public, people can um, vary heavily differently. And my some of the stickers I want to make I don't think anyone will understand or would expect them to be coming from a. They're just, I guess, like my own little um, propaganda. I guess. I think if I tell you something's bad for you, you won't care. But if I tell you that only losers do this thing, you might start to care.
Mm-hmm.
So I have like some very weird tongue-in-cheek ideas for like propaganda I want to distribute around the city.
Well, I think you two will, if I'm going to just make a judgment call, but I think you guys will go get along, especially if, again, like getting the attention of someone is hard. And then, of course, like you only have 3 seconds of their attention, and like how to make such a potent subliminal message where it's something to chew on because of whatever it arises within their own psyche.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's different ways to go about that. I have a very specific mentality on that. That not all would agree with, which is fine. I mean, I'm just literally describing it as propaganda, so it's not meant to be something you agree with. It's meant to be something that, when consumed, might change your perspective on something. It comes from a place that I think is good. Maybe just introducing a different dialogue to some things that are normalized, that are in the big picture things not healthy for us. Because I think just going online or writing a Medium article isn't going to change someone's perspective.
Right,
but I think
because it's a confirmation bias.
Yeah.
In that environment.
Sure. Yeah, and also it's like people don't read shit. But
Yeah,
but if I can make it quippy and 6 words or less, that might have more of an impact.
Yeah, that's again, it's on and on this goes, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because there is you have an edge to you in a good way, and like you're very aware in very relevant ways, in my opinion. I'm curious if you I don't think you tell me if I'm wrong, but you don't identify as an artist, or do you?
I've had an hard time with it. I've started using that term a little more. It's easy for people to understand, but the business card I'm designing doesn't have the word artist on it. I refer to myself as a maker. Because there's stuff that I call art and I'm making it, but there's other stuff that's not art in my eyes. There's stuff that's home decor, and I view that as different. There's T-shirts, which is not art in my opinion. No offense. At least to clarify, the stuff that I'm putting on the T-shirts is not art. There's links to my music. There's and there'll be links to my YouTube show on my website when it goes live, as well to like a presentation on the event that I curated when I lived in Lisbon, and any other little creative endeavor that I make, I'll work into my website at some point because, maybe it's bad branding, but if I want to sell something specifically, I can always make another page for it. But this is my page of like, hey, this is who I am. And I'm not, I view myself more as, if you wanted to talk like terms, like of labeling, I've always felt that I'm more, for lack of a less cheesy term, a poet than an artist, and a maker than an artist. And I guess like those two things come together is an artist. But I don't know. It's like I think it comes back to like my hesitation to be like, it's because I am unable to move past the fact that term means nothing nowadays.
Right.
It's all right, people are putting shit into ChatGPT. Which, don't get me wrong, I use ChatGPT all the time, but I don't take stuff from ChatGPT and say, hey, this is art.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
is part of your aim to wean and sort of like wean off of a marketing job or the other jobs that you have and be solely structured upon your identity as a maker and as a poet in the ways that you're defining? Do you feel like that's a possible outcome on the trajectory that you're upon currently?
Is it a possible outcome? Yes. It's always a possible outcome, but it's not one that I'm planning on happening. I think I have like a lot of little fun ideas that I'm toying with that potentially could turn into a revenue of income. But I also view a lot of things in that avenue as network related, which I don't have a network in higher art, and I have strategies that I'm gonna try out this spring to see if I can circumnavigate that. But I also dropped out of college for artwork because I found myself being pressured to make art, and I did not enjoy it then. And I like doing stuff with my hands and making stuff, but whether or not I want that to be my full source of income, I don't know, because I like the ability of like, hey, I'm not thinking about making any art in the next couple of weeks, so I can focus on wrapping up some other stuff with my free time. And I like the fact that I can just do that, and I don't have to think about it or worry about it, because I have a job that's very boring, and I don't have to like drop any creative energy into it because of the nature of my job. Other people with my position in other companies would have to be like creatively engaged. I don't. So it's nice. Like I like the idea of keeping it what it is for now and then seeing where it goes and then playing it by ear as it moves along. It's more important to me to have a fulfilling life than it is to be an artist. So if in 6 months I get the ability to go and do something that I don't see coming and would make my life more engaging, but I would have to stop doing art for a long time, I wouldn't care. That's because like most of the stuff that I do for my own exploration. You know, I also kind of rotate between making art and then writing and then writing music. So it's all kind of scratching the same itch for me.
Mm-hmm.
I made those two pieces for the art show that I organized in Lisbon. And prior to that, I hadn't made art in 19, 20 years.
How was that art show for you?
It was educational. Education, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot to say about even the art shows and how that's just a totally different territory with the expectations and things like that.
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of different directions that we could certainly go into, even with where you just where you just navigated through. How you feeling right now?
I was gonna say I'm happy to keep talking to you for another half an hour, but I'm gonna take a break.
Okay.
Mostly because I have to pee.
We will be right back.
Hey, welcome back. It took a little time. Well, that was the introduction to the interview.
Yeah.
We're refreshed.
Let's get some structure.
All right, here's the structure, huh?
Some structured stuff.
Here's the hard-hitting question.
All right.
Ready for that? How would you summarize the story of your life up to this point, as seen through the lens of your art?
I would say the two of them are. I would say that I tend to focus on a balance between positive and negative. I'm not an optimistic person by nature. I tend to find that I am contrarian to my surroundings. When things are going bad, I focus on the good. When things are going good, I try to remain humble and remember that things can fall apart very quickly. I think that the stuff that I've talked about creatively, you know, more so through like songwriting and lyrics than like visual art, but that might change in time. Um, is uh, I guess what you'd expect from someone that kind of grew up as a hopeless romantic, but has been out here dwindling in modern day capitalism. A longing for more, a longing for meaning, a longing for a sense of being remembered when I'm gone. I think these are very natural things for people to feel in moments. I think I feel them a little more than the average person for whatever reason. I think it's like a chemical makeup of my brain type thing. So I think a lot of the stuff that I kind of explore and why I say like, oh hey, like a lot of this in some capacity is, a bid to be known. Um, Comes down to the idea of what's up, buddy? Comes down to the idea of an inability to escape from a sense of mortality, and understanding the delicacy of life. And like, I'm now in my early 40s. When I think about time in moments, I can remember all of these like mundane and brilliant little moments that have made up my life that if I shared would have no um, impact on others, I think, because they were only special to me, or maybe there were things that we all go through, but they just hit me in a way worth acknowledging. But I also can't help but acknowledge that, like, oh, you know, I thought things would have gone differently. But I think I've always felt like I thought things would have gone differently. And not in a, I feel bad for myself way, just kind of in a, this is my story. And um, I just don't really know, like, where it's going next for that. Not that anyone does, but I think I'm just like very cognizantly aware of like, oh, time is passing. And I think that's also what drives me to do like a lot of things at once. Because like I think I have this urge to race death and get everything out there before I'm, hit by a car or some shit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we spoke a little bit that you came up in more of the grungy or the punk scene in that type of way. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It was an influence.
And like even with your art is in like even how you even sort of reflected upon your journey up to this point. Now, very poetic, and that quality of the bleeding heart of like the what is it? There's such a good the dilemma of the empath, in my opinion, that we're needing to confront is just like how much we recognize the suffering of the soul within our collective humanity, also very deeply personal within our own story, and like who gives a shit at the end of the day. But obviously it's very meaningful and it's very relatable, and if only the eyes could see to this dimension that is being overlooked. Like how do we present that edge in a way that can be digested, and how can we present ourselves in a way that can be received for these what it's wanting to allude to and lead for as long as people can trust the hand guiding into the depths, of the cavernous soul, uh, and not fall into the fear that the paranoid thought that the boogeyman lives there, and that's why we reject access to where the gems, the true gems, the unrefined gems, the unrefined um, precious metals exist. That it's part of like our process of needing to refine them and galvanize them to make something to last as our offering to humanity when we pass. It's just this weird, and also it's just like who gives a shit, and
Sure.
it's simultaneously, and it's just like,
Yeah.
like what's
No,
really the point?
there is for sure a level of existentialism. Um, uh, I think it's also kind of relevant for me in some capacity, like as people consume stuff that I put out there, is like I view myself as a mashup of 3 or 4 different versions of myself. Me in an environment where I view this as work, and that can be an art project. Very driven, borderline militant. I am hyper focused on getting a goal done. Me in a social setting, very camp counselor vibe. Hey, just want everyone here to have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Me talking about things that are personal to me comes down to this dramatic artist um, constantly wanting more than the universe can offer me in terms of comfort. Um, and then like there's definitely some form of like a little bit of redneckery in me from like my working class um, like adulthood and like my upbringing in New Hampshire, where it's like, yeah, I'd like to go to some elegant things and talk with people about culture and philosophy, but I also would much rather be building a go kart and a lawnmower with 2 idiots in the woods and getting really injured.
Mm-hmm.
Just enjoying like life, and the dumb options that you have. So I think like depending upon
Mm-hmm.
the topic or the setting, people will see different sides of my personality kind of come out these different perspectives. And I've never had conflicting um, internal perspectives on things. I think it just depends on like the topic or the endeavor, like brings out one of these sides of my personality more than others. And a lot of that just comes from my upbringing and the nature in which we engage with tasks and people and joy and expression. I don't think all need to be unilaterally the same. So
Yeah, well said.
yeah,
And I'm in agreement with a lot of those themes, and of course, it's um, the task of the time is just like how to move forward with carving new ways of approaching these things so that there's instead of again like accepting the suffering of the current times and sort of the oscillation through these different dramatized emotional states, and like I'm not again like it's definitely part of the journey, and a lot of the times it can be very exaggerated, and like there's a value in the exaggeration, the stimulation that comes from it. But is there a way outside of the individual journey to find in a collective harmony a way of gracefully navigating these spaces without it needing to come to like again like these salvific efforts, to like rise above and pioneer in like in the face of death and in the face of um survival as a as something that needs to be at war. That's
sure.
just and again like that's whether that's addressing anything that you said directly or that's just a thought that's streaming out of my mind is left a question altogether.
Sure.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? All right. Maybe that streams nicely into the next question, I guess.
Let's talk about it.
What has been your relationship with drugs? And the way that I define is that any mind altering substance, illicit or socially acceptable or prescribed in the past into the present.
Oof. I think, I mean, generally speaking, my opinion of drugs is very utilitarian. Um, I've never really been in line with movements like the straight edge movement, but I've also never remotely been close to understanding like the psychedelic movement, which I think is something that people tend to associate with art and spiritualism more. Um, I've had minor moments of experimenting with drugs when I was younger, but I'm talking like one and done. Um,
Like for what as an example? As like a one and done.
oh, like I tried acid once, and I had a great experience with some friends on a ranch in North Carolina during a snowstorm, and I was like, well, that's it. I don't need to do this again. That was perfect. I don't um I didn't even like set out to kind of do that. Potentially, I peer pressured myself into doing it, or just didn't want to be stuck in a house with three people on acid and being sober. Um, but also, it's one of those things where I think people will always have their own take on stuff like that, and maybe there's more to be discovered in like the psychological benefits of microdosing, and I don't think we'll really have a full understanding on that for a couple more decades. It's still kind of new, but I'm open to exploring it in that capacity for like PTSD. My relationship with marijuana products is very utilitarian. I would only consume something if I was like, yeah, I want to eat cereal and take a shower and go to sleep. I don't enjoy um, like I've never like I don't remember ever enjoying being stoned in the middle of the day and doing nothing. That feels like a waste of time to me. But I'm also someone that doesn't gravitate towards relaxation. Um, uh, prescription drugs. I've had different prescriptions over the years. That sounds way more dramatic than it is. Um, at my age, I think I've had like two or three different prescriptions, and my most recent one was actually Xanax for severe anxiety that I, used as I needed, and then very cognizantly, like, tried to make sure that I was only using it as needed, and then got off it as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Also that anxiety was very situational based. Things weren't going well, right? And it's like, well, there's an element of uh, sometimes things don't go well, and you might need something to like put yourself to the next step. But I'm a firm believer of you're never gonna get there unless you're like actively trying to get to the next step. And if you just need something to, for me, it was I needed to sleep because I wasn't sleeping well because of anxiety, and that was making me a train wreck. Um, so like just holding my body back into some sort of a normal behavior pattern while I addressed the things that were bothering me, that were like very real world things. Um, I think is totally fine. Is it healthy? I don't know. Did it work? Yes. So um, I'm not really too much of a recreational drug user. I get kind of skeptical of people that are. I think it's also because, like, I mean, my favorite, the easiest example for me is like, I do not understand people's relationship with cocaine. I've never understood it. But I also know that it is like, so for me, unattractive because what people that take that drug like in a nightlife setting do, and I don't think they realize what they do is they will say, okay, like everything will be fun if we take this drug, but we're out of this drug. So how do we get this drug? And then the whole night is then how do we get this drug to have a good time? And I'm like, yo, if I'm with the right people, I'm gonna have a great time in an elevator broken down. I don't like that is not something that I need or can understand why you would need. And I would be more curious, like, what is it about your perspective on things that makes you feel like you need this to have a good time? That's more of a problem in my eyes than the actual drug itself that you're choosing to band-aid it.
The nature of compulsion.
Yeah. Or yeah, it's I mean, there's also addiction to it as well. I know that this is like not a popular take, but every night doesn't have to be the best night. Some of the more enjoyable nights I've had have been the most boring fucking nights. Even alone. I have vivid memories of me sitting alone at a bar after work, deliberately there alone, just hanging out, and that led to having like a nice conversation with someone that wasn't like earth shattering or perspective bending, but it was just a nice interaction.
Just wholesome.
Yeah, and I think that
well, that's controversial right there.
I think there's a lot of value to it in terms of like fulfillment in life. It's like, not to sound like an absolute old man, but like I think there's definitely a lot of value to just like knowing people and knowing the mundane and like walking a place where you normally drive to like just get to know the literal lay of the land. I find fulfillment in that to a certain degree, not in the moment, but in the big overarching picture. I feel like I know things better versus like constantly chasing like an Instagram story.
Right. To know the statement of stop and smell the flowers versus the idea of that.
Yeah. I think I think that's probably the saying that makes the most sense. It's fine. The flowers aren't exciting. When you smell the flowers, it's not like a high. It's just flowers. But it's kind of that is your actual surrounding. So
it's
like,
the
trying
bizarre
to escape
paradox of the ecstasy of the moment for as long as the expectation isn't overriding what the actual experience is.
Sure.
And I think again it's part of the integration of Zen into Western mindset that can again like it gives permission for people to enjoy themselves without needing the cocaine riddled stimulation of this strong bass and being like, oh my god, I got so saturated with sensory overload that I got my money's worth.
I mean I think, and I said like I think I have a different take on things like spiritualism. I think that I would align a lot with on certain things with people that are socially very different than me in terms of like being a naturalist or into organic things. I'm like, I don't really care too much about a number of those things, but I also know that like the only time I feel whole is like barring when I'm in a relationship with someone that I feel like cares about me, like by myself. The only time I feel like when I'm whole, when I'm in the ocean. The only time I feel something comparable is when I'm sitting in front of an open fire. And like, you know, I've seen the most zen moments with my country living cousin who does not have social media and does not care. And he's just kind of going through his life in the most balanced of ways, just dealing with like very I think by modern day standards, like boring problems, and he's just content. You know,
I've seen
I think
that
too many people
in
are
strange
searching for
ways.
happiness
Mhm.
as opposed to finding contentment. Happiness is not this thing that you can like ride. It's like in moments. I think it's like contentness and peace with an acceptance of like your life and moving, which is why I like talking to like the working class side of my family and listening to what they're focused on, because it puts things into such great perspective from me, which is, from my opinion, the exact opposite direction of doing things like drugs. So, but everyone's different. I don't judge anyone for having a different perspective on drugs. I mean, who's to say what's what's you know a more fulfilling existence? But for me, this resonates more like long term.
Very well answered. And it's very interesting from my journey and from what I've witnessed of, there's a lot that can be understood about a person's own habits and behaviors by their how much their character is sort of structured upon uh, what they're consuming regularly.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And like that, it sounds like you're, from what you just shared, again, like just in the journey of your life, that you see the relevancy of something as a door to explore, and then to let go of it and to continue without identifying with that so strongly. And even again, like I would argue that there are things that you have, that I, again, like this is just a claim, that there are things that you have yet to have exposure to that are going on outside of the spaces that you have navigated, that by merit of who you are would be, I think they'd be filled in a way that is really meaningful, that the meaning isn't there because of like what you represent, and what your voice isn't there either. So like in that way of like and again, I'm not trying to make it like soft and gooey, but like it's interesting to witness in my journeys of like even what you just shared about like a country bumpkin kind of guy, and like because of, for me, if I'm going to relate to that, of like how real that is, but like because of my journey and like how much I've, and all the bullshit and all the drama, but like being able to arrive to a person with a fire, and like for them and their own experience, how much of a relief it is to be with someone that has done different things, and they're not in the same sort of stagnant connections, and like always working on the tractor, or just like having a beer, like there's new space to explore within their own mind, that there's like a give and take, where like that moment with like not to again, not to make it theatrical, but like not that moment, like connecting with like the Christ, a Christ nature, or like the Buddha nature, or whatever, is is made real by like again, you hear what I'm saying? Is that just like way too abstract, and what am I just in my thought way too much? Anyway, I think hopefully I pray that you're hearing what I'm saying.
You're navigating somewhere I'm not super familiar with, but I get the gist.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, the one last thing I'll say on it, which was a topic I like back and forth with someone about relatively recently. Um, I don't think it's. I think I think spiritualism, um, in general. If I were to try and look at it as like a scientific measure, I think it's a way of it's a measurement of how like in place you feel with your perceived surrounding. And I think a lot of people can get attracted to like mind altering substances as a way to sidestep like internal dialogue and internal anxieties. And I think you can get to a place that resonates in that capacity of feeling at ease and understanding, the universe. I think for me, like, if you were like, I want you to go do the most spiritual thing you can think of, I'm not gonna do this, but B, it would just be like getting naked and like walking with nothing into nature for as long as I can, and then hopefully coming back alive. Because that is like that's how I view like an absolute like reset of ego. Like, okay, there's no social media here, there's no protection. I am literally just a living thing roaming defenseless through this space. And like that is how like I imagine like actual like connection to your environment is like removing all of these, distractions that evolution has given us. Which is why I think like I gravitate towards things like, being in the ocean. When you're in the ocean, like you're flirting with, in some capacity, the unknown as a land walker. Um, and you can just like feel the physical environment pressing on your body. And it's cold, depending where you swim in the ocean. And where I've swum in the ocean, it's been cold places. So it's like, um, tech bros are out here doing cold plunges. There is science to that, but there is also like an aspect of like reconnecting to the like actual experiences and sensory and stuff like that.
100%.
So because I look at things through that avenue, and I get very skeptical of modern day spiritualism that doesn't acknowledge like the chaos that we live in. Right.
The hollowing of the ceremony to be just these rituals.
Yeah, there's a there's a yoga place not far from here that my neighbor went to. And I'm not saying anything about whether or not they should or should not be there, but I'm saying they're there. And it is a bunch of people that are basically middle class and up doing yoga in a building that's like freshly painted and branded nicely. And it's directly next to like where um I don't think I'm being incorrect by saying like people that are without a home congregate. I don't know if they sleep there or not, but every time I've gone by, there's like clearly people hanging out that have, at the very least, financial issues, if not like mental health issues. And my neighbor was pointing out like the hilarious hypocrisy of like listening to another woman in her late 30s talk about like feeling balanced, and in the window behind her you can see like a man who does not have a home pissing on the side of the building. And it's like, yeah, that's not, I don't, there's some discordance there that like I don't really resonate with. Nothing to do with yoga or like that particular thing, but like I think that's like kind of that are those two people in currently inside of capitalism. And I think if you take them out and put them out in the woods without anything, you're gonna see like the real person,
Yeah.
in that capacity. So
Yeah, again, it's just the divine comedy of like, if we recognize that we are within a universal mirror in ways and that we're reflecting, and again, like that's a whole conversation about like what's going on and the paradox of it all.
sure,
You know what I mean? But just like how hilarious that is of like these issues are only going to be more and more pronounced until there's an integration of that separate aspect that is wanting to be determined to be outside of the containment of spirituality and what is pure and what is sterile and what is holy.
Well, I think, and this is a thing that like I will always go back to, is like I think we live in a capitalistic society, and I think it is, worth mentioning in some capacity, like that it is hard for like true concepts to be accurate inside of a capitalistic society.
Right.
And also, like, it's hard for someone who makes X amount of dollars to say, well, I make X amount more than this person, so that means I have this amount of money to spend or donate. And, like, I think it's like this constant, like, gamification of resources going up. So it's there's always like this like strange discordance, and I resonate a lot with a lot of anti-capitalist concepts, but it's not to say that that's my political view. It's just the system that I think we live inside of, and it's hard to not acknowledge it anymore and then have some like emotional rebuttal to how fucked up so many things are and are normalized. So
I feel like that's what I value talking with you is like you're really aware of the reality that we're living in.
yeah, I think that's super. I don't want to be offensive. I think it's super arrogant to not be.
Right.
Right.
It's not offensive to me. We share a commonality, and I'm not challenging any of those concepts because I recognize it. And again, it goes back to the privilege of the circumstance that, like, again, it's like the how fucking arrogant that would be if like we're sitting in here and we're throwing a temper tantrum about the reality outside the walls when like we have the ability with the laptop, with the microphone, with the dog sleeping just so comfortable. Like this is all consequent, like by merit of what has been structured that we sit upon it, and then we can be critical of what it is.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
I think part of that also comes like back to like forcing gratitude upon myself because it's very easy for me to be like, oh, I'm this age, and I'm at this point in my life, and I don't have all these things, and I see other people with these things, and comparison being the thief of joy, like definitely factors in, but like also in some other capacity, like as not flashy as renting a condo is for a lot of people my age, um, you know, in a lot of ways, this is kind of all I ever wanted. Like I have a little home with a dog, and I have opportunity, and that's kind of like I think it in my eyes. So, um, yeah, I try to. I don't know if I try or not. I just know that at the end of the day, I am like cognizant of, um, like irrelevant of how much more I want. I have enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's also not the end. Like it's
Sure.
not you haven't arrived to it, but also you're open for how it will reveal itself,
Yes, I
and
think
all of these different things.
I think that's the thing is like we don't know if it's the end or not. I could just stay like this forever. Everything I could do could fail. Could never get anywhere. If that's what happens, I just hope I'm not frustrated about it because that time spent being frustrated will be a part of my life, which I don't want that. I
Right.
want, you know,
But in the
some grace. To put it in old-fashioned terms, some grace about things not going how I want them to go.
Yeah, and if the pursuit is genuinely one of truth, then there's the recognition that frustration is not an arrival, but rather it's an indication of a perversion in those ways of something more harmonious and something that is in line with a greater truth that you wish to put your faith in and believe in, that is accessible despite the fact that it isn't necessarily always there. You know, we catch glimpses of it in passing in some sense.
I think the thing about this is like as far as I'm aware, this is more of a prevalent thought in like Eastern theology, but like there was a day when I just realized like, oh, this all these things that I'm working towards and da 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 and all these projects. I'm like, this is actually my life. This is I'm not building towards my life. This is my life.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of like having that perspective of like, yeah, okay, so if I want to spend my life building towards these opportunities, I just need to make sure that I'm okay with doing that if they don't work out. I don't want to end up like another person in my 50s having an absolute midlife crisis. And that doesn't change anything. It's just, I think, just a perspective change. And also, it's like holding yourself true to what you want to do with yourself and then trying to be motivated. And I'm definitely not perfect. A lot of these concepts are things that I, aspire to be every day. And some days I fail, and I try not to beat myself up over it and just try again the next day.
It's a lot of it's always good to have a sense, but of course, where the rubber meets the road can only be seen in time, and like again,
Sure.
the integration of lifestyle, and not from a critical place, but also like that whole quality of accountability within brotherhood, or just human relationship altogether. Of like speaking the aim, and then by professing what the aim is, that the people around you are holding you in light of that, so that you can be refined according to what your actual desires are, despite your animal nature and the things that often pull us away from self-transformation.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, how do you view the concept of healing? And how do you personally prioritize health in relation to creative expression?
I think healing in general is severely misunderstood in a lot of aspects of our culture. I think there are some pretty wild, like interesting ways to approach healing, and I think it also depends upon the person and what they're healing from. Communicating is a wonderful way to start emotional healing. However, communicating to the wrong person will undeniably um, make it impossible to truly heal. So if I date a person A, and you know person A, and you don't like person A, and then I get broken up with person A, and I'm distraught about it, and I'm confiding in you about my experiences, and you're responding to me in a way where you're like, well, that person A just sucks, blah, 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 and there's like a negative thing to it. Very easy for me to start vilifying this person. And even if this person is undeniably like was bad to me, going into that perspective in my next chapter of having like anger or resentment at this person does not help me moving forward. That emotion will get translated somewhere else. So I think it's very important to be aware of like your support circles. And I think it's also important to understand that like there are different types of therapy that resonate with different people more. I'm very vocal, and it's not hard for me to articulate what I'm feeling. So I can do traditional therapy pretty successfully. Um, but I also find that 9 out of 10 times, um, I'm not there to learn something new. I already know the lesson that I should have learned in this experience. And sometimes that lesson is just shit just doesn't work out, and I'm sad about it. Normally, that's not why I'm upset. Normally, there's something that I probably should have addressed sooner and more aggressively, and like my regret of not doing that compounds this feeling that I'm having. And so, I approach therapy the same way that I would approach drugs, a utilitarian like. Um, I think if you go to the wrong therapist to talk about emotional stuff, you're going to be worse off. And I think you need to understand that. I'm a big advocate of therapy as a wonderful tool. And for you to get to where you need to get, you need to have a clear goal. The last time I was in therapy, it was because I had just left an awful relationship, where I'd been lied to a bunch and pretty much like textbook gaslit a bunch. And anytime I started getting feelings about something weird, there was like deflection. And obviously, in retrospect, if I explained this relationship in retrospect, you'd be like, you're an idiot. Why didn't you leave? But I have like, hindsight clarity of like, oh, blah, blah. When you're emotionally attached to someone, you like want to give them the benefit of the doubt while they're potentially being awful to you. And so I went into therapy, not with the whole mindset of like, my ex is an awful person, no, I was like, I want to make sure that the next relationship I go into, I don't carry an ounce of the feelings I'm having right now. And that is not necessarily a thing that can say, well, it'll take X amount of time, but that's the goal. So the whole goal there is to come to peace with my experience, the role that I played, how I failed my own boundaries, and understanding that though it feels personal, sometimes when someone does hurtful things to you, that's just who they are. They didn't do it just to you; they do it to everyone, and it's a shitty experience to go through. But like understanding all of that makes it easier to like incrementalize your way through processing your emotions and facing some hard truths. Um, I don't really have a ton of relief from making creative works about experiences like that. I have pieces that are in like the process. Like I said, like my artwork takes a really long time, especially because I'm not doing it full time. I have one or two pieces that are in relationship to my last um, partnership, relationship, whatever you want to call it. And I don't, in any way, shape, or form at this point in time, have an emotional connection to finishing the piece. There's no anxiety about finishing it, and there will be no completion about finishing it. I think it's just a concept that this forced me to um, acknowledge happens to some people, and this situation happened to me. And it's basically like echoes of betrayal in an image, and it's calling back cognitively to these different like a little emotional bell zone off, some pleasant, some horrifying. Um, but my making that piece has nothing to do with healing. My healing is entirely separate from that, from just being like, I don't want to be an untrusting piece of shit partner to the next person that I choose to like spend time with. Because if I am, that will be a shitty time for all of us. And I don't want to do that to her. And I don't want to do that to myself. Um, so, is anyone perfect? No. Like, will it be, if I find myself in a situation that's an exact replica of something that I went through historically that ended awful, will I get anxiety? Probably. We're humans. We have like fight or flight survival mechanisms. But I want to make sure that if I come up on a situation like that I can process it like a fucking adult, and not be a bad experience for someone else, or like ruin something very good just because it's unfortunately comparable to something else by someone else. So
A lot to say about all that, but certainly that, we're only a victim of who we decide, and how do we take responsibility for the outcome of any experience that we're creating, and how even we can see collaboration as all relationship. And of course, it's like we have an ideal formula that we're approaching relationship, but we have to prototype that. And obviously, if we start to, okay, we're gonna get this rocket up into the next stratosphere, but it blows up, then it's like, okay, what actually, that type of thing. That's certainly how I'm hearing it. And
I definitely think that like it's per person. I think my my I tend to avoid certain words. Like I don't use the word victim. Um, even in the own scenario where I like, and this is my own thing, and other people are different. Like, if I am in a situation where I'm pouring gasoline on the floor and it catches on fire, yeah, I didn't intend for it to catch on fire, so I can feel bad that it didn't go the way I want. I think it's more important looking forward to recognize maybe that's not the behavior I want to do to avoid my house burning down. It's not to say that like that cognitive recognition and the emotion of losing everything I have are directly related. You can have more than one internal conversation with yourself about, hey, what's going on? I don't know the emotional capacity and resilience of everyone I've ever met. I have a lot of my friends are very like meat and potatoes of like, yeah, fuck it, on to the next thing, blah blah. Yeah, this sucks, but we're gonna get over it. You know, very standard northeastern man mentality of lick your wound and get going. And there is some value to that of, you know, objects in motion tend to stay in motion easier than objects at rest. But also, like, I'm aware that like I'm more sensitive than some of my friends, and so therefore I'm also aware that there's other people that are more sensitive than I. I never necessarily, well, I don't. I try to not judge someone if they're having a hard time moving past something that's happened to them. Um, but I am a firm believer of my empathy for you runs out if you're not trying. If you're trying and you're not getting there, like you have all of my support. But if you're not trying, then you know, what do you want me to do? It's like
seeking of attention to pity as opposed to
there
effort.
there
You know,
there are some people that I think, whether knowingly or not, and there's like a man in my life over the past 10 years uh, that was like this. He drove me nuts. I think he just got too used to, like, too comfortable with saying that he wasn't able to move on to the next thing. And I think that, gets into some real serious psychological stuff. Maybe it's like a really bad self esteem. I don't know. Maybe it's anxiety. I don't know. I do know that, you know, I've had people close to me in my life that have gotten too used to being negative, whether it's passive or aggressive. And I just know that at the end of the day, like, someone like myself, like, that affects me a lot. So I have to be very cognizant of like how close do I let myself be to this person who I love, but it's just making me miserable because I'm like absorbing like that misery, and I don't see them doing anything to get out of it. And when I'm offering things, it's defeatism. Um, and that to me that's like sad, but I also don't know. Maybe that's a thing where that person needs to like stay there longer than makes sense for me. And I'm not going to judge them or feel different about them as a person or not invite them to my birthday or a Pretendica wedding, because of this behavior, because I value them as a person. But I think it's not a black and white situation. But for me, I do think it's an element. Like, I try to be understanding, but I try. I'm going to be a lot less likely to invest my energy in helping you on your journey if you're not already trying to walk. So
I feel like it sort of is in that imagery of the stones polish each other. You know that they're by merit of grinding against each other is that they're becoming polished.
sure,
Like this type of thing of like even if again like if we're considering this interview and the conversations and wanting to trust in the spontaneous nature of of reality and like, you know, the unknown creation and the unknown potential and like where things just naturally go, that like it would inevitably get to a point where there's a commitment, just hypothetically speaking, that there's some abstract commitment that we both have a vision of, that we both agree on, and that we're wanting to walk and stride towards that aim. And that, of course, like because of how intimate and how personal that would be, that like we would be exposing our shortcomings because like that's again like we're moving into new territory. You know what I mean? And I feel like for me, and like certainly from you know the loving committed relationship that I hold in my life, and again like we define that in you know very it's monogamous, and it's you know there's even that type of commitment that we define it according to what makes sense for our unique designs, and we're trusting in our own natural development separate from us being directly connected, but trusting also that there will be a convergence point where we're both holding each other accountable, and there's like you know the hope in the new day, you know, without living desperately, you know, in the shivering cold with like the imagined outcome of arriving to that fateful morning of a warmth and a return. You know what I mean? And I know that maybe it's poetic, but like it's just like this that in my opinion is part of the pioneering journey of community and a new approach to connection that in my opinion um is accessible for everyone, but in my from what I've experienced is more likely to be an outcome with people that find value in their own introspection, in their own self-discovery, in their own desire to have time for themselves and to reflect and consider patterns beyond how they're defining them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think also it's relevant, you know, to bring up like where I grew up and like my friends from that I'm still in touch with are from the Northeast, and we're not nice to each other. We're loving to each other. We're not nice. If we think what you're doing is um, not gonna work out, we're gonna let you know because you're my friend, and if I need to hear something, I might not like it in the moment, but I'll respect it in the long run. Of like, all right, you know, even if I don't heed it, you know, at some point I'm like, yeah, fuck it. My buddy told me this, you know,
Yeah.
and we value that. I think it's about like being comfortable with the uncomfortable topics of, you know, what's going on. And also because like we have that general dialogue amongst us, um, like it does make it easier to make light of a lot of things that like I think some people would find uncomfortable. And transitioning, you know, bad experiences into humor is when you're ready for it, a great way to move past it as like, you know, the end all be all of your experiences because I think there's a lot of focus on being young and being you know popular, but I generally feel like with the right perspective, like your actual life is kind of waiting on the other side of that. You know, I know a lot of people that have found peace and happiness in their 40s and 50s, and I think that's directly related to, you know, not being out there looking for a partner that you can't find or like hustling for a job that you're not going to get. Just being, hey, you know, this is what's up. I'm going to find like the true, you know, meaning of contentness in this life. And, you know, part of that is laughing at your fuck ups, you know, which I enjoy doing. And I enjoy pointing out my friends' fuck ups and they enjoy pointing out mine. And that's like something that I think that like you have to be really good friends in some capacity to do that. And in a way that like isn't trolling people on things that are sensitive.
Right. How to diplomatically approach those things because of course like sometimes the layering of a relationship can only come with time, but like how do we learn what we've learned of value of these relationships and bring them into a new approach in a new time with new people that have also done their own type of work to approach to like to arrive to like camaraderie and respect,
Sure.
For relationship and like the delicate nature of things.
Well,
I
think that I think that comes down to, and I've had comments made here in Texas. I am polite in certain settings and try to be socially graceful in certain settings, but I am never not straightforward. I will never do something that would constitute like a two-faced behavior. And people either like it or they don't, and that's fine. And if people don't like it, they're not going to like me at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the same way. If I feel like you're being pleasant to me just for social graces and I get the impression that it's insincere, I'm going to dislike you because I don't need a bunch of friends. I need like two good ones.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes, that's always at this point in my life, it's a requirement regarding the relationships that I open into, and of course, because of the territory that I navigate, it's a lot to learn about just like always being, and like I don't see it as a sacrifice. I enjoy it. It's a great exploration, but like by merit of that, I've seen like where there is genuine substance, and oftentimes it is like like knowing like we both are desiring for a harmonious and graceful navigation through maybe rocky territory, because we're wanting to be the devil's advocate around all of these maybe sensitive topics that we hold relevant to our own personal perspective through life.
sure.
But like we're not holding uh, desperately to any of these things, and like again, like how.
Well, I think the thing to tie it back to the question that's relevant here, and like to give it some more use to other people. If anyone watches this,
We'll see.
That support network works for me, and that's
Gotcha.
part of my healing process. None of it is great, but that's the type of like I grew up on and appreciate and give what we would call tough love. And it's not to say that I won't be there and listen to you vent your feeling, and I won't. It's not that I won't validate your feeling. Your feelings are your feelings. It's about what happened where we're not going to bullshit.
Right.
Did you knowingly date someone who does this behavior, and now you're upset that they're doing that behavior towards you? Right?
That's
I'm not going to like unvalidate the emotional journey that you go on for thinking that you're special to this person and that it sucks to realize you're not. And it sucks to like go through these emotional things. But I am going to hold you to the iron of you knowing we did this. Right? Because someone needs to take the blame in this. Like, it's rare that you didn't fuck up in some capacity.
Right. Because if it takes two to tango.
Sure. Sure. And if it's not that scenario, if you went in blindly, stay too long when things start getting wonky, you ignore your friend's advice,
The pattern's always there. It's just like how much are we willing to put up the blind sides because of like again like blah blah blah, all these different terms around the seductive nature of women and how we can lose sight
or
of
the
reality.
seductive nature of men.
The seductive nature of humanity.
I don't view it as a gender issue. I've seen both friends of mine of multiple genders and sexual orientations have all experienced very similar situations. I think there's some nuance that can happen depending upon who's dating who and etc. But it breaks down to the same thing. Did you sell yourself something that wasn't real? And how do we get through this emotional thing? And but more so, how do we prevent this from happening again? I don't want you to go through this again, and that's where that comes from. I don't want you to go through this again. So when it gets to that point in the conversation, I'm gonna and when somebody can have that conversation and then is unable to prevent themselves from doing it again, that's when you lose my emotional support. Hey, you need to fix this. I can't be your sobbing pillow nonstop.
Right. Because it becomes a different form of emotional dependency.
Yeah, well, I would
Yeah.
say it's passive abuse.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
I think we said this when we were speaking in your studio. I learned this koan from a homeless man in Philadelphia. He said, East Coast fuck you means I love you. West Coast I love you means fuck you.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like
I do know the
vein.
fuck you means I love you is very true.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a girl I did not know today, and I told her, I said fuck you to her very loudly, and she laughed because she's from New England, and it was relevant to her comment.
Mm-hmm.
And she understood we're just joking, right? Because this is the way we are. Yeah. She was wearing a Boston shirt. And I was like, oh, you're from Boston? She's like, yeah. I'm like, cool, where are you from? She's like, I'm actually from Connecticut. And the only appropriate response to that is, fuck you.
Yeah.
And she laughed. It was great, blah, blah. So it is this Northeast grit that I really like. It comes with its downside. There's plenty of people that I hate from the Northeast.
Yeah, there's a reason we're here in Austin talking.
Yeah. So
definitely see that. Well, I feel like we talked a bit about community. I don't know if there's any closing remarks that you want to make. This is like maybe the question that
on community, I think the only thing that I didn't touch on earlier is I think the concept is amorphous. I've never felt like I was part of a community that didn't have a locking geographical sense and lasted once that geographical sense was no longer relevant. I think it's about having an attitude of giving in any way, shape, or form you can, and finding other people that not only appreciate practice that, and just making sure you're bumping into them more, because those are going to be the people that are going to help you when you need help and talk you up and keep you in mind because they are aware of these things versus there's plenty of people who I've met in passing and tried to make a connection, whether that be having a follow-up cup of coffee to get to know each other better or whatever, and they gone to the wind, which is fine, but it's that's not a person that I want around on the regular basis. I had somebody apologize to me for not making time to accept my invitation, and I don't think I was too harsh. I don't think this person knew what to do with my response, but it was very simple. It was if and when you're ready and you want to, the invitation is there. Until that moment, I don't want you there. Mm-hmm. If you're not coming excitedly to get to know me more as just a person in a similar field, then I don't want it. I don't want it, right? I want to find people that resonate with this mentality of, hey, it's a give and a take, and it always starts off with giving more than taking, because that's just kind of how it has to go in some capacity. And I've made some friends here in Austin that I am excited to see how we interact with each other in the coming months, years, whatever. That I resonate with on this capacity. Are we best friends? No. But do I consider them friends? Yes. And if I see something that's relevant to them, I throw it their way, and vice versa. And that's how you start to build something comparable to it.
Because things like this take time to grow.
Yes.
So it's more about that investment versus, of course, the hot burning fire that only lasts the night.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
Sure. That's I don't view that as anything worth acknowledging anymore at this point in my life. I don't know what the goal is, but obviously, if someone has the goal of personal growth and or fame and or opportunity, and those are the things that they like habits as their top priorities, they're not gonna help you out, most likely, in my experience.
The
But
self-seeking.
but if somebody is um, looking for something along the lines of community and support, you're gonna know real fast because they're gonna show up, they're gonna respond, they're gonna, within within their capabilities. Some people are really busy. I have to remind myself that some people are really, really busy. Uh, and then if people don't, you just take it gracefully and move on, and maybe someday down the line, things will change. Because nothing is permanent. So,
There's so many factors to take into consideration. Again, that whole thing, one day at a time, but it's a good start. Last relevant question. Has anyone told you that you have a slight resemblance to some of the Baldwin brothers? Has anyone ever said that to you?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
I say that in a compliment.
Yeah,
I don't
I mean,
know. I don't know any of their names, but there's from this name. It's a crazy one.
Okay. Well, yeah. Sure. Costume.
Nice.
I only remember. Just never saw it, and it's like I don't want to be offended. I don't really care. I have a really bad my outward projection. I have to like sleep think, oh yeah, I need to like put on my shirt. It's like it's just not natural to me because from my life, and coming from like punk rock shit to like being a working class carpenter guy to being in facility management to like being a remote worker. At no point in time in my social circles or professional circles have I really ever had to give a shit about what I look like. And vanity is not a sin that I indulge in, right? So yeah, I don't really think about it too much. So I don't really care if you're like, oh, you look like this guy. Like, all right, cool. I don't see it. I either see it or I don't. I think the only one that I ever saw, and I was like, okay, I see this. Is there, and I don't know if it's him or if it's just the angle it took the photo of, but there was one time a picture of the Tom, the singer of Radiohead. And like, if you looked at him, and I looked at a photo of myself, I'm like, oh, I can see where you're getting at here, because like I have long hair, right? So if I let it down in a certain way and part a certain way, and then look this way, it looks like the photo. But it's not. To me, it's just kind of funny, I guess.
Yeah, it's just a strange phenomenon when it happens. Like,
You
oh,
know,
cool. There's the
I like
relevancy.
I like going around to different places and seeing things that remind me of things I've seen elsewhere. Faces, especially when I see like a face, I'm like, oh, this person reminds me of so and so, and I can see like this. They look very similar. It just kind of goes to over there. We're all just swimming around in a big petri dish in some capacity. But yeah.
Well, Brian, it was a pleasure, my friend. If people want to find you, when I figure out this design of how I'm going to be presenting it, obviously I'll link all your things. But if there's anything that you want to call attention to right now,
Well, the nice thing about hopefully what will be done before this comes out is my website will be linked to everything that I'm doing. And this is not Strout.com. And that's also my Instagram.
This is not Strout.com.
Yeah.
Well, this has been
Brian Strout. Can I give you some lore on this?
Let's hear it.
Just to show you how much of a dad joke I am, like walking around. When I was like 20, I think, AOL Instant Messenger was still very much a thing. And this was like a great way to have group chats and or like paying a bunch of people. Cell phones were around, but not as common. And like also like we were still paying like per message you sent, which is like a concept like people, getting cell phones now would like never like wrap their head around it. Like, oh yeah, dude, you have to be like you'd get raked over the coals if you went over your limit back in those days. Which was
I
either
remember those days.
your parents
Actually.
would kill you or you'd be broke, depending on who's paying you.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, AOL Instant Messenger was still super popular. Wait, chat with folks, and in a very on-brand fashion, my AOL Instant Messenger name was "This is Strout." So when I said, "Hey, what's up?" there was no "Who is this?" You know exactly who is writing you a message. You're like, "Oh, what's up, Strout?" Strout being my last name. It's very common, especially amongst men in New England, to call each other by our last names. So we're on a sports team. Ironically, I was never in sports. Still happened. Totally fine. This is Strout. I had an interaction where I dated a lady who I met through someone I knew, and she started getting a little creepy, I think is the phrase I'm going to use, where I was like, I don't know what this is, but I am uncomfortable. And like, as a 20-year-old man, if something's making me uncomfortable, like, I think I have to acknowledge that something here is off. And we don't need to go into the specifics of it, but I was like, something here is just off. And I feel like the longer I interact with this person, the higher the probability of something happening that I'm not going to be happy about. And so I was like, well, I feel like if I block her, that might make her get offended and reach out in a more aggressive way. Versus if I just disappear, she'll just be left saying, oh, he's not online anymore. Blah, 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 blah. Be a little less personal. So I made another account to hide from her. Obviously choosing this is not Strout. So that's where my whole fucking name comes from. And so I've just kept that
Wow.
going.
So she's been sort of your inverted muse in a way.
She was a catalyst for my dad joke continuing in some capacity. Yeah, very dumb humor. I told you, part of my personality is like camp counselor, cheesy, goofy, donkey. Um, and yeah, I just kept that. That's, if I ever play video games, that's my tag. Instagram, that's my tag. And then when I started doing art again, I was like, well, I'm going to build a website. I was like, well, it doesn't make sense for me to like try and rebrand as, whatever. And I don't have an issue with my name, but I still like Strout better than my full name. So I just kept it. There you go. There's about Strout.com. And that also allows you to do the dumb joke of, is this or it's not actually Strout. You can play a dumb little bit. So, yeah.
Deeper questions that never are answered. Huh?
Correct. Correct.
Hey, my friend. Really good getting to meet you.
Sure thing.
Further. And this has been Artie.
Yeah. Artie's just
he's been holding it down.
Annoyed that we're not letting him sleep.
Beautiful.
All right.